Howdy everyone, right then, I am making sure the bot is on. So, because that should be working. Should be, he says. Anyone want to check it? Bot is on and happy. And let's see, image slideshow. That should all be working. The volume should be working now. Let's check. That should be working. I shouldn't be able to hear anything. Good. Have we got the right image slideshow in the image slideshow? Oh, no, we haven't. We haven't. We've got all this. Sorry to do this. It's making sure everything's set up properly. I was checking out a different video before I went live, before I went and had some food, and I forgot to change this back. Yeah, there you go. Right, with that being said, hello, and welcome to Balancing the Humours. How modern nations balancing diplomacy and war in the ships they build. Yes, I did do food. I had some food. I went off of food, and that's why I'd done the stuff before I had the food, and then I, had forgotten I'd gone for food, and then came back and went, oh, I hadn't set this up. I thought I'd done set more up than I had. So, I do appear to have shaving foam down my shirt. Give me a second. I hadn't realised that. Yeah. Well. Ugh. There we go. That'll do. That'll do. That's better. That is a way better. Right. So, yes, it's my old student ambassador's t-shirt, and the fact I still fit in it when I was given it when I was 22 is a mild point of pride for a man nearly 40. We'll leave it to one side though. They did ask for it back. I forgot to give it back to them. Anyway, so what can we say? Well, today I'm going to be talking a lot about Alessio Padalano, who was one of the professors I had the great pleasure of working with at King's College London. So, shirt is a bit apt in some regards. Also, and I cannot stress this enough, I had another video planned originally for the 6th of August. Then recently I've done a few videos, and they've been slowly building up. People really have some misunderstandings about naval diplomacy. It fits, Paul Amos, that's the thing. It fits. And this is the reality. We need to do something about naval diplomacy. And the stuff that comes in. Because some of the stuff that comes out of naval diplomacy is very silly. I started off with Googling naval diplomacy. And I have to admit, the first thing that came up when I googled naval diplomacy is actually this stuff. By the way, it's a body wash which smells of the sea with a hint of citrus. I do not know why There is a body wash which is named naval diplomacy. I then found out there was a deodorant named air defense. And all sorts of things. And if you want proof, the links are down below. Okay? I have not been sponsored. I am not getting any money for this. I am just mildly in shock that when, as someone in my field, I type in naval diplomacy to Google, the first thing that comes up is body wash. Okay? I realise that is probably because someone is paying for it, but I did not realise naval diplomacy was such a catching term that people would want to pay for it to get a body wash to sell. No. Just no. So please, I have been discussing this on Discord this afternoon. I have been terrified by it. I am mildly terrified. I have many, many questions when it comes to this body wash. Most of which will never be resolved because I am never buying it. But, yeah. And here's the fun thing. It took me quite a bit to track down the article, which is also, you'll find linked down below, which is Alessio Padalono's Introduction to Naval Diplomacy. And it's all about the modern naval diplomacy in the current framework. And, yeah, you will find that. But the thing is, there is this myth which goes around about naval diplomacy, that naval diplomacy equals gunboat diplomacy. Gunboat diplomacy, i.e. when you're using the threat of force to coerce something out of someone, is a part of the spectrum of naval diplomacy, but it's very much at one end. It is very much at one end. Nightwolf, I am not annoyed that I just didn't think of it first. No, sorry. No scenario do I think that it should be thought of first. And, kid you not, again, deodorant called air defense, okay? I am both mildly impressed by that title and worried about it in so many levels. So no. Take care, Raptorat. That's just, no. But the naval diplomacy is more than just gunboat diplomacy. That is the reality. Gunboat diplomacy, it's made famous because it's imperial and it's used as a good example of imperialism and of people dominating people with force and all those things. And it's not wrong, but it's very much at the end of the spectrum because those gunboats do a lot more than just show up and point guns at people. They often had to do. In fact, the whole scenario was the gunboats were often representing something else, which you really don't want showing up. So the gunboat with small gun was actually preferable to what would come after the gunboat with small gun. And you also have to remember that in many scenarios we're talking about, the naval personnel are acting not just as the enforcers of any particular nation's will, they're often also acting as the enforcers of treaties and agreements, some of which we may not agree with today. We might not agree with the contents of those treaties. We might think they are terrible. They are. You might not get much of an argument from me on that subject. And probably possibly side with you. Quite probably side with you in case of many of them. But the reality is, those were the treaties at the time, and they were being enforced by mutually enforced by as agreed upon by various powers. And that's it. Gunboat diplomacy is not even an end of naval diplomacy, but it's towards one end on the spectrum. It is towards the, we're getting onto the levels of next stop is full out and blown war. Basically, gunboat diplomacy comes in after you've tried diplomacy with dinners, after you've tried trade diplomacy, after you've tried so many different things beforehand. Then comes gunboat diplomacy, usually as it's the cheapest and smallest option before you go on to full-blown, we're fighting a war now. That's the reality of it. Gunboat diplomacy is that scenario. So let's look at modern naval power, and what I've put them together into the soft, smart, and hard power scenarios, because that's usually where we'll start to talk about the interrelation between force and diplomacy, between naval power and diplomacy, or military power and diplomacy, is usually when we start talking about using the P word, power. So you've got hospital ships. Ships going around providing ongoing medical relief, providing hospital facilities. The UK currently has a couple of charity ships which operate out of the UK. I think they're called the Mercy ships, which is something which certainly the government does not undermine, but is certainly something which the government doesn't direct. Now, this is the trouble. With your America, you've got two ships which you own, which go around doing it. And you can use politics to direct them. So there can be a very visible idea of your links to an area, a very visible idea of your commitment to an area, a very visible way of you projecting power in a very non-threatening way. I.e., what is less threatening than turning up with medical care and going, we're here to help. That is what those two ships represent. Now, saying that, and I do mean saying that, it's a complicated scenario sometimes in how you bring them about, because one of the things that I often see when it comes to hospital ships is, why don't they react more quickly to events? And it's because hospital ships are often tied up doing things. Hospital ships are often doing long-term commitments. You often arrange where they're going to visit years in advance. Why? Because they turn up, they've got a huge quantity of medical facilities, and usually the local systems which are using them, medical systems which they are interlocking with, interconnecting with, interfacing, would that be a better word? Interlocking, maybe interconnecting, working with. They are using them to deal with backlogs. They basically are going, right then, we have all these surgeries which need to be done. You have a crew of world-class doctors coming with all the facilities they need to do it. Please, come in. And they are basically a very good way of going around giving that kind of demonstration and that kind of commitment. But also, there's actually part of the action for them is the long-term commitment. It's that you can have faith in them coming in. You have faith in them as a long-term ally, as a long-term partner. That matters. I did once witness a very interesting discussion, which was basically along the lines of, when the NHS was having backlogs, should we start appealing to the Americans to send their hospital ships? That wasn't treated with amusement by many of the people involved in the conversation, but it was put forward. The NHS is, please, before I go wrong, I don't want anyone thinking about the NHS. They try their best in a very interesting and quirky system, which is definitely uniquely British. But it has its good points and it has its bad points, like all the medical systems do. I do get worried when people try and say it's either the NHS or the American system are your two options for medical care. There is a whole range of ones in between. And that's all we need to talk about. But it was quite a funny conversation to, hear it about. Then there's humanitarian aid, disaster relief. Okay, this is usually a more emergency scenario, especially with ships involved. And usually this is where you hear warships showing up. Okay? One of the things years ago that was going on was a very big joke, and I knew it was, I'm fairly sure it wasn't a real life event. It was someone trying to make it a joke, which was basically apparently a load of insert your favorite European national population of workers here, making fun of America sending a carrier to a disaster relief zone of saying they wanted to bomb those people. And an American stands up and goes, it will supply power, it will supply aid, it will supply people who will assist with the various situations, it's got a hospital facility, it's got planes and helicopters to do for search and for rescue and all the other things going on, it's got all this stuff. And you sit there and go, that is a very good point, but no one who has any experience or any understanding of an aircraft carrier, or any framework for understanding an aircraft carrier, or disaster relief would, or especially not engineers, and it was always seemed to be a group of engineers, would ever make that joke about an aircraft carrier being sent to a disaster relief zone. Because they know all that. There is not a single engineer I've seen in the past, including Russian, Chinese, or French, or whatever, because the joke kept shifting who they were, who would have made that point. They all would understand aircraft carrier, especially nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, lots of helicopters, planes, and hospital beds, turning up in disaster zone. That is a useful asset. No one who is not a complete buffoon, and therefore probably not an engineer, would ever make that as a claim. Hello, First Penguin Lord. Hello, everyone. Wasn't news to send one to Greenland, right? Yeah, that was the thing. They were considering sending one to Greenland, and it was a case of the people of Greenland were going, why do we need one? We have a very good medical system, and we go to Denmark if we need... There were a lot of assumptions being made at certain points. I have to admit, this is one of the things I have found funny over recent years. A lot of people make a lot of assumptions about parts of the world, about their state of medical care. The example I tend to give is the amount of times I was told we would struggle finding people who spoke English outside of Tokyo and Japan. And literally everywhere we went, we were dealing with people speaking, in some regards, better English than I experience at home sometimes. And by that I mean purer versions of English, rather than when I'm wandering around parts of Cornwall, and because I know them quite well, they will start to speak in Cornish. And I do find it funny when the Cornish sneaks into my accent, because I get so used to talking it, the amount of people who jump in and go, that's not English, and I'm going, no, it's not, it's Cornish English, it's a different thing. Foxhound, I remember a guy crying about QEs because he wanted hospital ships. He got very confused when I pointed out QEs would be in a role. Yeah... There is a lovely link again below. Justin Hedges outlines a very nice link to an article where it was basically, look, if we're going to be building things like NSLs, we should probably commission one or two as a hospital ship. And when we're talking about the current acquisition program the British are going through for their amphibious ships, as you know, we're currently rejoined the Dutch one, and the idea is to buy for, I would hope, more of these ships to replace our current amphibious force, because they are smaller. But it does work in some regards to go a bit smaller in the ships and spread it out more, if you buy enough of them. But yeah, it's fun. It's fun in that if we could get a couple more and have them build as hospital ships, they'd be really useful assets. They'd be really, really useful assets. And for Britain, that could matter. Because here is the thing. Friendship counts for something. This is the point about soft power, a lot of stuff, is it's friendship building. It's building a relationship of trust. And that can benefit your companies, it can benefit you politically when you need support in world events, when you need to rally people around to support a world measure, let's say on the environment or whatever. You want friendship. Because think about it. You can make a very logical argument in a room. And there is a great example of this in the... Oh, what was the racing movie? Oh... I think it was in Rush. It's basically where they put James Hunt versus Ayrton Senna, basically, and they try and make more of that rivalry than it was. It was far more of a friendly rivalry than it's sometimes illustrated in that movie. But the thing is, Senna makes a very logical argument about Nürburgring. A wonderfully logical argument. And anyone who's listened to that thinking just in pure logic, they're going with that. But Hunt is everyone's friend. And Hunt wants to race. And everyone's prepared to go with Hunt because, in a way, friendship trumps logic. And, believe it or not, the same thing works with countries. But it works on a different level, okay? Instead of friendship, Read interests. The country which has consistently reciprocally looked after your interests and you've worked with them, you've built a relationship of trusting each other with your interests. Ergo, when they need something, you're more likely to deliver it. Oh. It was Nicky Lauda, not Ayrton Senna. Why was I going with Ayrton Senna? Sorry. Nicky Lauda. I do apologize. This is why I shouldn't be talking about movies from memory. I should not be talking about movies from memory. I would love to say I pay attention in most movies, but I don't. I'm not moving again. It's just I haven't managed to empty out all the boxes there, my railway boxes, and seeing as I haven't started building the railway yet, or rather rebuilding the railway yet, the boxes haven't been emptied out. So I have boxes of railway stuff, model railway stuff, in this room, which have not been emptied out because the railway is not yet being done. So I wonder how many battleships could use power plants in the old days. A lot. Again, think of things like, imagine what the White Fleet did when it turned up to the disasters it was delivering for the Americans. That was humanitarian relief. That was humanitarian aid, disaster relief. That's what they were doing. Now, the thing is, this is soft power. This is on the scale of what navies do. And then we have smart power. Now, smart power is a modern day phraseology which has come in, which is, how do I put this? Well, we're talking about something which is not soft power, not hard power. It used to be called just doing naval diplomacy, but now we have to have a catchy new phrase for it. So, smart power has arrived. It's smart. Okay, let's be honest. A port visit. A port visit tends to be a lot of diplomacy, a lot of meeting up with people. If you're going into a country which is dry, i.e. doesn't allow alcohol, you'll usually use it as a way to get alcohol to your embassy. A large volume of it. All these things will happen. You'll host other nations' diplomats. You'll host the country you're visiting's government on board for dinners and tours around the ship. You might give tours to some of the civilian population as well. And you'll basically do a huge amount of, hello, look at us, aren't we friendly naval people? Now the thing is, we're friendly naval people, and that above my head is a 4.5-inch or 5-inch gun. Yes, it's the best place to set up a tent on this ship really is towards the bow where it narrows off, and there's a gun pointing at you the entire time. It is as a tale as old as time. And it's one of the first diplomacy issues which naval officers have dealt with. As long as there have been professional navies, there have been port visits. With naval officers basically acting as a mobile embassy, a mobile diplomacy. Now, port visits... Well, I was going to include freedom navigation in maritime security to do, but we'll wait out a second, because port visits are slightly different than freedom navigation exercises. And Matthew Keeling, of course, the dance floor is the helipad, with the helicopter looking at you with the torpedoes mounted. Yes, or rockets! I remember once being on board a Royal Navy frigate, which was doing this in... Oh, where was it? It was a European country. It was a very long time ago. There were still Type. It was a Type 22, and it was still Type 20. It was a Type 22 I was aboard, and literally they had the links with rockets on one side, rockets and machine gun on one side, torpedo on the other side. are mounted up to fully display its systems. Of course. Now the thing is, the whole point about this being smart power is this is a fusion of soft power and hard power. It's using hard power to make a soft power case. Aren't we good friends? Isn't it better us being your friend than anything else? How about we stay being friends? Would you like to take part in exercise? Would you like to do any of those multilateral engagements which we'd like to do? Yes, again, because I would argue port visits between countries are like phone calls between friends. Okay? If you think about it from the perspective, it starts to make a bit of sense. If you have a friend who you haven't spoken to for 20 years, they might still have a close connection to you in that they are the friend from you from a long time ago, but they don't know who you are now. And they can't judge what you're going to do in any circumstance, can they? They don't have the connection. Whereas, if you have a friend who you phone and chat to every month or so, then even if you don't meet physically for 20 years, they're going to understand your mindset a lot more when they meet up with you than someone who hasn't talked to you for 20 years. With nations, it's more complicated. When they work together, they need to have a seamless version of interoperability. They need to be able to understand each other at almost every level, which means they need lots of people to know on their side, to know lots of people on your side, for it to work. So you need to do something more than just phone calls. And actually going to visit each other, exchanging port visits, having these kinds of meetings, these kinds of discussion points, these kind of abilities to get together and do an exercise and all these things, is what builds that relationship. So it's easier to make TikToks about a warship when you can physically access a warship in that sort of way. It does work better, trust me. I've spent a lot of time making lots of videos about ships. I'm kind of annoyed this year I haven't spent that much time aboard ships because of a lot of stuff with house and other work. Every time I've been going to go aboard a ship, it's got cancelled for various reasons. But I'm going to be working on it as the year goes on. And the thing is, that then can build into sales, arms sales, naval weapon system sales, naval system sales, diesel engines. One of the strangest sales I ever talked about is that the people who make toilets, I cannot remember who they were, who are the toilet manufacturer in the UK. I really wish I should remember their name. But they made a whole bunch of sales off the last time the Royal Yacht Britannia did a world tour. Because they installed new toilets. And everyone rather liked them. They were really nice toilets. And they ended up selling them to a lot of embassies around the world. And that may allow them to get a lot of more sales and grow their international reputation. It's amazing how many sales a ship visit can generate. How many deals will get signed as a result of people jumping on that particular imagery and bandwagon. So, yeah. It's a useful thing to do. Now, maritime security. There's drugs, there's piracy, there is freedom of navigation exercises, freedom of the seas maneuvers. And all these have various different targets in terms of maritime security. Freedom of navigation is often about making sure the precedent remains, or that you have access to certain parts of water. There are multiple sites around the world. The most famous, of course, is the Taiwanese Straits, but there are others where nations claim control of claim a certain area is part of their economic exclusive zone, and sometimes even part of their territorial waters, and yet internationally it's not recognized as such. And the thing is, as long as you keep wandering between there and don't acknowledge it, that means it's very difficult for them to enforce it as an act of enforce it in law. And it's very difficult for them to stop a warship without using force. Remember, I've talked about this before. Warships are things which are very difficult to stop in peacetime if they want to move places, unless you want to use force and go to war. This is one of those issues when we start talking about things which ships are getting up to in peacetime, and one of the reasons why you almost need more warships in peacetime than you do in wartime. Think about this. Submarines operating around the world. All the undersea communication systems, all those things, that are critical international infrastructure. And people might be wanting to plant things on those critical pieces of infrastructure to try and listen to communications, to try and tap into what's going on, to try and find things out before the others do. And that can be nation states. That can be businesses. There is a lot of corporate espionage going on in the world. It started off as a weird thing when you had a lot of spies being let go as and setting up security consultancies at the end of the Cold War, as everyone sort of turned down the funding and to their various intelligence services. But it has grown into something which is a very real, very constant threat, which needs to be managed not just at a other commercial interest kind of way, but at a national level kind of way, because the company might want to do it for them, but if they get their systems compromised by a nation state, you then have problems. So you sometimes have to manage these things, and you'll have submarines underwater, and then what you have to do is you have to stick your submarine in the way of their submarine, or have the frigate going and flashing away with sonar. And that's the thing. How do you stop a warship from going somewhere it doesn't want to go in peacetime? You stick your own warship in front of it and you play a rather large, potentially expensive game of chicken. Iceland did that in the Cod Wars. They won. They were using ships which are a lot cheaper and a lot hardier than the frigates the British were using. And this is the thing. It's a constant. It's a constant form of diplomacy going on at sea. Because it's about posturing, it's about positioning yourself. In some ways it's about conflict management as well. Failure to respond, failure to focus on a situation, failure to put forward a response to the situation can be read as weakness, which can lead to other things being done, to greater risks being taken by your opponent, to greater slights being created. And that can lead to problems. Also, going into aggressive can also lead to problems. It's something which has to be carefully managed. And yeah. Oh, Sadu, the bumper ships edition has been going for a long time. Look at half the damage which was taken by various ships in the Cold War. It becomes yeah, a problem. Now the thing is, you also have drugs operations. The Royal Navy takes part in them in the Caribbean, in the Mediterranean, in the Middle East. Why? Why is it good for navies to take part in counter-drug operations at a long way from their home? Well, there's two reasons. One, usually that means you're catching the drugs as they're on the supply, and that's usually a large concentration of them in one place, and you can deal a far bigger blow to those drugs and to that drug supply by getting that point. And two, you then get to tout it to your allies as you helping them as well, helping yourself. It's a brilliant win-win-win situation. Pirates, similar one. Now, there are still sometimes you don't get involved in things, and that also causes problems. Here's one of the dirty little secrets that didn't come out of the Strait of Hormuz, right? A lot. And I laughed at almost every time it was said. So, everyone was talking about why people weren't supporting with minesweeping assets what was going on in the Strait of Hormuz when it was being blocked and blockaded in, the recent conflict. The answer almost no one wanted to get to was because they've all turned down their minesweeper numbers on the grounds that it was going to be peaceful, that wars were wars of choice now, and they didn't need them, so much so, there aren't actually any available. Dirty little secret, there weren't enough minesweepers available to go and do the tasking. People are saying, this means it's technologically not possible, we're in trouble, how would we do this? No, the technology's there, it's just no one's got enough of the frigating hulls. No one's got enough of the tech, no one's actually spent enough time doing it because for pretty much the last 30 odd years, people have been told it wasn't going to be necessary. So go and look at the end of the Cold War when minesweeping was going to be left in the hands of the European parts of NATO. Go and look at how many minesweepers Britain had, the Netherlands had, France had, Italy had. Go and look at how many of these vessels had. And now look at how many they have now. It's not a technology problem. It's a physically having the ships to be able to go there problem. That is the reality. I did laugh about that when I was seeing that. It was going, oh, but what about drones and the threat of drones? It wasn't the threat of drones. We can deal with the drones. We just don't physically have the ships to go and do the job. And the idea was, oh, well, we can mount drones and remote control systems on other ships. Yeah, here was the other idea. Who wants to rent you a ship which you're going to take into a minefield? No one! Because you might lose the ship. I'm sorry, the concept of the idea was that mine warfare would be something you could rent hulls for. I'm not sure which particular accountant came up with this bright idea. But it is not really a viable one. So please, buy some ships! And the trouble is, for the USN, this was a big problem because their entire doctrine had basically relied on they would have some mine warfare capability, but pretty much their allies would come in and lead it, and would be the major front of it. And there's all sorts of things going on. All these nations said no, they're supposed to come. The reason they're saying no, mate, is because they don't have any ships to send in the first place. Because they've been so quietly getting rid of that and siphoning it off so they would pay money for things which were better for their egos. And headphones warning before the segment's in the final edit. It's alive, Mark Wren, it's alive. Oh, but no. That is it, okay? This is a problem. This is the thing of naval diplomacy, and they're doing smart power and all these things. If you don't have the hulls, you cannot do it. You just cannot do it. It ain't gonna happen. And then we get on to hard power. Now, one of these links doesn't show up blue for some reason, but it is down below, and I have checked it, it does work. Just, you have to copy and paste to go get it. But that is the Red Cross's own journal, and yeah, that explains a lot of it. Well, the thing is, when we're talking hard power, we're talking sanction enforcement. And I've put some of the articles there. And again, the links to these articles are all down below. The links are down below. Runond, no. Just no, I do not need body wash. I do not need naval diplomacy body wash. Not necessary. Oh, listen, wars of choice doctrine is a new thing. It's also experience. Look at the experience of British on the isolation. No, wars of choice is not a new thing. But the thing is, it took such a big hold across so many countries from the 1990s onwards, in that form. But yeah, splendid isolation, the American the American scenario of neutrality and isolationism, all these things, they come up a lot. But the thing is, sanction enforcement. Again, a good example is Britain, but there are other nations. There are nations as well with the Shadow Fleet, all these things which are supposed to be sanctioned. And many nations sign up to go, we support this. Great. How are you going to do anything for it? Well, you don't have the ships, do you? And if you want to ask the question of why doesn't Britain have the ships, look at how old the Type 23 light frigates got to before they're finally being let to go and leave service. Look at how we cut down the procurement of the Type 45s and other things, all based on all sorts of assumptions about the world being peaceful. And the wars of choice doctrine. And the trouble is, sanction enforcement becomes very difficult when you don't have the actual ships to go out and do it. No, Runon. No, Runon. Runon, no. 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 Just no. This is the thing of it. Sanction enforcement, doing these sort of things, they are basically a form of economic blockade. They are a form of economic warfare by the sea, where you're restricting access to goods and the flow of trade. And they can only be done by you physically being there. You sending a nice note to a ship, the ship's captain is going to go, I'm in international waters, I'm carrying on this way, I ignore you. Unless you show up and go, hello, we have a boarding crew. We're taking you into custody now. Yes, that is a 5-inch gun. We've also got a range of missiles. Would you like us to demonstrate those? No, you'd like them to stay in the boxes. Okay. Then beyond that, you've got strikes. Now, strikes can be various forms of things. They can be covert action. That can be a form of diplomacy, diplomatic influence. It can be actual overt missile strikes. Again, one of the interesting things I keep reading, and this is one of the things that keeps coming up and causing me to laugh a bit, is the amount of people who go, the Americans, the US Navy stayed in the Indian Ocean and launched all its strikes from the Indian Ocean to attack the Iranians. This shows how powerful the Iranians are. No, the Americans stayed so far away from the Iranians that they could hit them whenever they liked, but the Iranians couldn't do anything to them. That's not how strong the Iranians are. They're in trouble. They don't have weapons that can actually reliably go and engage the threat out at that distance. And the whole idea was that the American Navy should have come closer. No, you don't. The whole point of naval warfare is you try and take out the enemy and you damage the enemy before they can damage you. The problem for the Iranian conflict, just take this as a quick read through from a diplomatic perspective, is that the same issue has had come up many, many times in history. You cannot bomb state places into regime change. You usually have to have a land force threatening to invade, or something else happening. You cannot bomb places into regime change. A lot of nations have tried it. It doesn't usually work. In fact, it's never worked. It's always got... Kosovo was an example because the land forces were basically sitting there going, we're ready to come in, we're ready to come in, we're ready to come in, we're ready to come in on the border. This is the reality. And again, nations, especially America, keeps being attracted by the idea of we can drop a democracy from 40,000 feet or something like that. You can't. You can't drop a dictatorship from 40,000 feet. You can't drop democracy from 40,000 feet. You actually have to go in and do something. You destroy, Iran's a good example. Militarily. Well, let's be honest. Militarily, they have got small boats laying mines. That's about limiting their force structure. Again, that's very difficult to deal with because those small boats can operate from anywhere and anything can drop off a mine or something and we don't know if it works or not. But basically, their military hard power as a force has ceased to be. But the thing is, that doesn't really matter. It's not going to do regime change. And then we have war. And war is the continuation of diplomacy by another means. Because, let's be honest, war rarely stops to diplomacy. Because the moment you have war, usually your diplomacy then reverts from how you are dealing with your interlocutor as your opponent to trying to coordinate your allies to work together. That is often more annoying and more difficult. Getting allies to work together. Good examples of this. There is a movie out recently about Charles de Gaulle. It is in French. I managed to make it through half an hour of it. Mostly because at a certain point I was sitting there going, this is beyond my level of French to successfully follow, and frankly the captions was not that fun. I'm going to wait till there's been a properly English dubbed version for me to try and have a go at. But yeah, coordinating allies is more of an issue for that. It's it's fine. Now, Joe Fergus, the British were actively trying to replace de Gaulle with Vichy officers from Africa, so he had good reasons to be distrustful. The British were trying to replace de Gaulle with anyone. They found de Gaulle really, really frigging annoying. And if you're looking from a British perspective, you can understand why. He is really, really annoying. At several points, the Americans were also actively looking for anyone to replace de Gaulle. Because he was really, really annoying. That doesn't necessarily make it bad from the perspective of France, but he was really, really, really annoying. As far as his allies were concerned. So yes, they would have liked to replace him. There was various Anglo-British attempts to replace him. Focus on, my favourite description of his most sincere megalomaniac I've ever met. He was fun. But the thing is, basically most of the thing is they were trying to find a more senior officer than him to come join the Free French and take charge. Their theory being, then de Gaulle could go off and become the commander of the French ground forces and would actually be happy. And let's be honest, de Gaulle would have been good in that job. But yeah, it didn't. Look, when we say actively looking as well, it's a case of they were hoping to get someone. But it's not so much active as in, we captured this part of France, this part of the French colony. Was there someone in there who's a 4-star? Please tell me there's a full admiral or general survived who wants to join our side. No. We still have to deal with de Gaulle. It's just, yeah. But, why does the Navy do all this? Why do we have a Navy do all this? Now, that's an interesting one to get into, because the amount of times I hear people go, well, we could get civilian agencies to do this. And the argument usually goes, right, so a Navy in peacetime is a lot of money and skills to be leaving doing nothing. You have a lot of people who are usually quite bright, quite capable, quite versatile in their skills training. And peacetime, doing diplomacy, doing these operations, gives them a chance to test out some of their skills, but also gives them a chance to keep them busy and keep them active and make them use them utilized. And there is also the reality that if you want to hand these jobs over to civilian agencies, when war came, you would have a lot of ships you couldn't do anything, which wouldn't be useful. and you probably wouldn't have enough warships because they wouldn't have been available they wouldn't have been had a job to justify them in peacetime to the economists and the accountants. And you also, to implement such agencies, you'd also have to start organising a lot of international agreements and laws of the sea, etc., where frankly the naval forces are suitable for it. For example, if we are talking about the diplomacy visits, it's very accepted that a warship is sovereign territory of the nation whose flag it flies. It is incredibly understood exactly when you're doing freedom of navigations, all these things, exactly what that ship is. There is no ignoring that. That's a warship. Even when you're doing things like humanitarian aid, again, it's a very visible, lots of people wearing your badge, all these things. It works out well as a simple demonstration of the British or the Americans or the Canadians or whoever is here. You're getting a lot of adverts. Thank you for telling me that. Let's go have an argument with the lovely people known as YouTube. Let's go to stream settings again and check on that. Monetization. Oh! So, YouTube had managed to skip it from the once every 24 minutes you should get some adverts thing to medium adverts, because apparently, again, I need to be better at these things, because I'm not putting off enough ads in my videos to earn enough money, apparently. Yeah, and that's also part of the problem, Gooch. If you don't keep the Navy busy in peace, the crews get bored and leave for jobs where they feel they're busy, feel useful. That is one of the problems, again. They're usually active, motivated, self-motivated people who join navies, and they want to be busy. And realistically, there's also the fact that a navy provides a flexible asset that can do all these jobs in one hull. Making civilian equivalents. Let's be honest. If you want a civilian equivalent to these organizations, are you going to have the same civilian organization want to provide ongoing medical health care to a nation, to another nation, while providing on-call disaster relief to wherever you need to send it in the world, whilst also providing a diplomatic? No, it's going to be different groups. You're going to have some civilian ships are reporting to the Foreign Commonwealth Officer if you're the UK. You're going to have some reporting to the International Board of Trade. It just gets problematic. Whereas in this scenario, in the scenario we've operated on, the warships just do it all. That's a question and a half to be asked. Sorry, it's just flashed up on WhatsApp. Hey, caramba. Sorry, my sister just messaged me through a question which is slightly a worrying question. Where is my tow rope? She's at home. Her car's not left the house. It's all fine, Alex. It's all fine. You're not going to have to go off hunting for a sister in the middle of nowhere. And yeah, as my good split, Navy is a Swiss Army knife, civilian agency is a single-use blade. Yeah, that's pretty much it. It's also, you're building organizations around these things. And civilian agencies often require a lot more predictability in their deliverance. A lot more predictability in what they're going to want to put out there, etc. To an extent, there is an exception in navies that they are going to be at sea and they're going to be on duty for 24 hours a day and all these sort of things, because they are naval military organizations. They sort of expect things a lot more. And this is not to say there aren't civilian disaster relief organizations. There are. I've got a very good friend who is part of one. And he flies off to disaster zones. He leaves his wife, his 2 small children, at home. He gets on a plane and flies into a disaster zone to act as a part of the recovery teams, to do all the work for them. And he does it very, very well. I have a lot of respect for him. And occasionally I do consider going with him. But the reality is, he's kind of a rare option in the civilian world. And he does it basically on a voluntary basis, and he's got an employer who doesn't mind him going off and doing it. It's not a kind of organization where you do it full time. And the thing is about civilian ships is they can't be armed. When we start arming civilian ships, you get into various interesting areas, which is one of the reasons why things like the Royal Fleet Auxiliary, etc., and the things like that exist. To get around the fact that you are technically putting weapons on a civilian ship. IKB, she cannot get the car physically round to the garden. That is something I know. Also, as far as I know, the rope is nowhere she can... Yeah, it's nowhere that she can get hold of. So we're fine. We are fine. Rope is nowhere she can touch. I will find this out later when I finish the live. I will find out what is going on. So then we have a thing of, how does the Navy build for this? Now, one interesting thing is, when discussing about this and researching this, I actually found an article which was on a batch-free river class, and it's from Naval Technology. It's by Richard Thomas, and it's again another article well worth a read. I'll talk through the various concepts, but again, what I've been trying to do with all these articles I put down below is, if you want to go for further reading on the topic we're discussing tonight, there is a whole example of the stuff you can read, and you will hopefully find interesting, below. It is a whole list of articles. I forget how many I put down there, but I will go see. Let's see. I actually forgot to number them, didn't I? That was sensible, Alex. That was sensible. Forgetting to number them. Oh, there's 10. No. LVMO 702, no, I never underestimate a woman on a mission. I am the only boy in 40 cousins, trust me, I have had many demonstrations of this. But when I say physically can't get the car round into the garden, this house is ringed by Cornish hedges, which basically means stone mounds that her car physically can't get over and into. And if she did, it would suddenly become trapped in the back garden. And those are farm fields, which she also doesn't have access on that side. And there are other houses on either side. And she can't get through to the garden around our house because literally there is walls and a physical house in the way. That's what we're going with there. So, how does a Navy build for this? Well, realistically, when we're talking about Navy building for this, you're going to be talking about 3 different layers of assets. Status assets are your top-ranking diplomatic assets. They are aircraft carriers. They are any surface ship which is nuclear-powered. They are larger, and we're talking in the high teens, 20-plus thousand tons surface combatants. They are things which turn up and their mere presence in an ocean generates newspaper articles, let alone them actually carrying out a port visit. Amphibious ships don't always often fall in this category, though, because let's be honest, for some reason amphibious ships don't get the same attention as an aircraft carrier does. No idea why, but they are treated in some ways as being lesser. And again, they shouldn't be. In many ways, I would argue an aircraft carrying an amphibious ship are interchangeable in terms of status, if not in terms of what they deliver in terms of capabilities, in terms of their level of, they are a capital ship asset. They are an asset which exists to exert effect at distance from themselves. One is by landing troops which will go to the target and destroy it, and one is by launching aircraft which will go to the target and destroy it. But realistically, those ships turn up, they have status. Now, then we have what I would tend to call warfighters and presence ships. Warfighters are ships which, when they do port visits, they are something which is acknowledged. They are acknowledged as a warship. Most modern frigates fit in this category. They're going to have an impact. But they're also too expensive in many ways for doing regular visits. You've got to have them, they're going to be wandering around, but you don't want them doing regular visits. If we're going back to the 1920s, 30s, or we're going into the 1890s, sort of the late 19th century, we'd be sort of talking about the ships at the top, the status assets, as being the largest cruisers and the battleships. We're then talking about the cruisers being the warships doing the warships that turn up and go, hello, we're here for our semi-annual visit. How are you doing? Yes, we're here to make friends and show up and be nice to you and everything. And then below that you have what I call the presence assets. They are assets which are, let's be honest, are less about warfighting and more about maritime security tasks. Because again, if we start thinking about these lists of these taskings, at what point do you need the full power of a warship? Do you need the full power of an Arleigh Burke to do drugs or counter-piracy? No. You might need the full power of an Arleigh Burke for something like a freedom of navigation operation. But the thing is, that's the level at which you're sort of talking about. That level is when you start to have the warships really come in and really are dominant in their need. Below that, you have vessels like the River class patrol vessel. Or the recent... Well, the Italian patrol vessel is an interesting one, because... how do I put this about the Italian OPV? The founder of Naval class are sufficiently capably armed that they do qualify, I would argue, in their full armed status as a frigate. But that is the PPA full. They have a PPA Light Plus and a PA Light, which basically tells you what it is. They are producing the same hull, and some of them come out heavily, suitably armed enough that they are a frigate for a battle group and are ready to start to rock and roll. And some of them are sufficiently lightly armed that you'd honestly look at them and go, are you sure you're Italian? What do you mean? Well, you're carrying so few weapons, you practically have shifted from Italian to Texan. That wouldn't work in any other scenario, would it? No. Because the Italians overarm are the only ones who arm their vessels with sufficiently enough guns that Texans would be envious. Literally one nation. One nation does it. And it's not the US Navy. Texans are always complaining the US Navy is underarmed. At least every Texan I speak to on it. It's terrible. Killing the Italians like a ton of... Yes, they did. This is the point. Most Italian warships turn up and they are literally the only ships which, if you... I'd like to point out this actually has happened to me once when looking at an Italian frigate, and I was with an American who was a Texan, and literally he was looking at the guns festooned on this vessel and went, "Ah, isn't she beautiful?" And I'm going, "You just want all those guns, don't you?" Yeah. That was a Texan friend I made through CIMSEC, the Center for International Maritime Security. Yeah, fun group. It was a fun time. But down to the reveal, yeah, they are an interesting class. But again, that is the capability you can produce. That is what you can bring in. So, yeah. It's... I'm trying to find my notes for the next session. And for some reason, I'm finding a huge amount of notes about various other things instead. Ah, well, we'll track it down. Italian ships, 50% by armour by volume. Potentially. Now, shameless book plug. So, why I put the shameless book plug in here. Now, normally they use the shameless book plug in videos to illustrate the middle point. It's also where I gotta go, hang on, I'm breaking to an extent from the pattern. So, I've been talking about the theory, what the contents are. Now we're going to look at some actual navies. I've got, let me just check how many, I think it's 6 lined up, from memory. Yeah, 6 different navies lined up. We're going to look at how they are approaching carrying out naval diplomacy, how they are attaching it, what they're doing in terms of status assets, what they're doing in terms of presence assets, what they're doing in terms of warfighting assets. And if you're wondering if this has come up because of some response to the recent video on Russia's destroyer, yes. Because talking about it as a status asset, the amount of people... There was one person who literally did a comment, which was, oh, they don't need to build a destroyer. They can send 2 heavy bombers, 2 frigates, an oiler, and 2 tugs to do that job. I'm not sure if they actually listened to what they were saying. They're basically saying, instead of sending this nuclear-powered destroyer to wander around the world, they will have to send a task force plus some heavy bombers. We're going to get into the questions in a second, but yeah, that's it. And I'm sort of going, you're not wrong, but do you not see that is the reason that at that point the nuclear-powered destroyer is actually the cheap option? It's the cheap option. Or the amount of countries where they don't need it because they're not oppressing countries all the way around the world. Naval diplomacy is not just about oppression. The naval diplomacy is all gunboat diplomacy. No, it's not. Gunboat diplomacy is, as I've said at the beginning, a small part of naval diplomacy, usually just below actual warfighting. Yeah, even if we're going with all the naval air bombers which Russia claims they operate, which I'm not really sure, they've got about 29. I don't think they have that many. I think they've lost a few. I seem to remember them a few of the Tu-160s getting blown up. So I don't think so. No, the Royal Navy is going to be part of it. Yeah, but I was actually trying to seek for other navies to put in. But the Royal Navy is a good example because they're an example of, currently we're building it because we've managed to run it dry because of our leadership. And so I get to have a bit of time going, yeah, this is what happens when you do it badly. I find it very annoying that the Navy, which I chiefly, being British, they are my Navy, and they are the ones I can keep using as an example of how not to do things. It's just, yeah. The whole point about diplomacy missions is they're all supposed to survive. LVMO7, LVMO702. They're all supposed to survive. Diplomatic missions we're talking about. Discord is supposed to be running. It's not running. That's helpful. Meanwhile, the British Army is just screaming incoherently in the corner. No, a British Army corporal is screaming incoherently in the corner. A sergeant is looking depressed behind them. Right, so, from the Wilson triplets, this was the first one. What caused Shikaku's damage control to be so excellent? Do you think they had made everyone have some damage control training on the damage she took across sea near the sinking the storm? Yes and no. Actually, she had quite a large team of damage control specialists. The Japanese ran it as a damage control specialty. But also she has some very good officers, including a very good executive officer. And they've done a lot of cross-training with other members of the crew. So she not only had a slightly larger damage control team than some other vessels her size, she trained more of the crew in being able to assist the damage control team, and so they'd work together on that. So that's it. But she had some very good officers who did really best practice. The Ajax crews are just shouting what at each other. Look, it's just the deafness of Ajax crews is, well, it's more a case of Ajax crews also managing to make people actually sick while they're motion sickness as well. I was thinking a special military operation. No, this is diplomacy, global diplomacy. Literally, they were going, instead of doing a diplomatic visit with a single destroyer, which is what we're talking about, no. To do that, they'd have to send 2 frigates, an oiler, 2 tugs, and 2 heavy bombers. For a diplomatic visit. That sounds more like an invasion. You are right. That is what it comes across of when you're sending that many. It's, yeah. Nightwolf, what lessons learned from the Honda Point disaster, and how long did it take for them to be implemented? Ooh. That's kind of a big question for today. We'll have a look at it. How can I do this in about a couple of seconds whilst talking about this whole video? The big lessons learned were to do with navigation and navigation training. Basically, they had several errors. They had ocean currents which were attributed to the Great Kanto earthquake, and basically Watson and Hunter, who were the 2 officers, the squadron commander and the squadron navigator, and they were basically held example of it. But it was navigation errors, and it was a whole lot of extra navigation training, and basically lessons in duplicating effort. You start duplicating effort. There's also the fact that those officers did actually take the blame on themselves. They did actually say, look, no, blame us because we're the ones at the top, we're the ones responsible. But yeah, these things happen, sadly enough. They do. What's in turbulence? How are naval ships in the current Japan being built, their doctrine compared to China, Russia, and US? We're going to be getting onto that, but also, one of the fun things I've been having recently was over the whole thing of causing destroyers, Nazi destroyers. And people saying, oh, well, you know, that would be like saying ideology affects any ship. And it does. Okay? So, one of the things that came back to me was, oh, that'd be like calling the British aircraft carriers conservative aircraft carriers. Well, no, they were ordered, and a large part of their building was constructed under Labour governments. And then they were taken over by conservative. And that's the thing, you have to change over. Usually you'll have political ideology start to impact ship designs when you're dealing with a single ideology, a unified ideology political scenario. When there isn't competing ideologies, when there isn't differences in the political classes. And even then you'll get cultural bleed through into decisions being made. The ships are not being produced in a vacuum. So, you know, when we're talking about Japanese doctrine moment versus China, Russia, and US, I would say the Japanese doctrine is to get the ships built. One of the things that I notice is that when I'm talking to the Americans, they are constantly looking for something better. They're constantly looking to improve things, which is one of the reasons why their ships take so long, is because they keep umming and ahhing over whether they finish the design or not. Whereas the Japanese, once you've got to a point that you're happy with the design, boom, build it. And if it's bad, iterate upon it later on and change it. There is that difference going through it. So, with China, there is a pumping out of ships which is happening quite a lot. There are a lot of worries over the longevity of those ships. And why say worries? Well, we've seen what's happened with a lot of their construction. They have form in construction history so far of pumping things out in large numbers. Cities, railway lines, roads, bridges, these sort of things. And then they last for a while, and then they don't last. It's going to be interesting to see how their vessels sustain, whether they've had better quality control going on in their shipyards, which they could well have done, because that's where the shipyards are a far more constant place to maintain quality control than if you're building an entire city. If you're building an entire city, you've got thousands of building centres going on. It's far more difficult to maintain a level of quality control than it is in a shipyard where you've basically got the ship being built and you can have someone watching it. What's the triplets? If Summer Shikaku's damage control were transferred to Taiho, could she have been saved before blowing up? Doubtful. There's always the possibility, so you can't say never. You can never say never on those sort of scenarios, but the odds are not with them. Nice to go for one. So with the balancing of diplomacy of war ships they build, how much does the trust is easy to lose and hard to get back apply? How much does the phrasing trust is easy to lose and hard to get back? It applies a lot. Diplomacy presence is something you build up by constant involvement. You cannot disappear. You have to be there constantly. Presence is not something you can turn up and go, "Hey, I'm back! Everyone love me!" No, you are regular. It is the difference between being the person who visits the pub for once once entirely. The person visits once a year when they on holiday, and the person visits every week. That is the difference in the relationships you're talking about. Joffrey, seeing how cheap hospital ships can be, Indonesia hospital ship is just a retrofitted LPD costing $200 million. Why aren't more larger navies investing in soft power? Because the world is run by accountants. Literally, it's that. I would say, if you consider how Britain has gone on at the Olympics and various other things, as the NHS is the greatest gift we have brought to the world, it's a national wonder, all these things. The fact that we don't have ships going, you don't have hospital ships for our navy jointly crewed with the NHS wandering around is a massive surprise to me. We're going to make such a big status of it, we're going to use it for almost every massive event to make ourselves feel good and big and powerful, which we may or may not be. And yet we don't do that, it just seems strange. Night Secret everyone. With the Mercy class hospital ship conversions, how likely do you see the USN getting a purpose-built hospital ship as successor to the Mercies? Very unlikely. They'll probably get more conversions. Runon, no. I've said no already. I'm going to keep saying no. Foxhound, the Scimitar had a lot of crashes in the service due to being built to operate from the small carriers. How do you think a Scimitar built for the Maltas would do? Well, a Scimitar built for the Maltas would have less constraints built on it, so it should be a better airframe in theory. You don't really know until you actually see it operating, but should be. Were there many plans to upgrade? There were always plans to upgrade these things. Actually, executable plans? Different matter, but Scimitars were suddenly planned to be upgraded. Joel Fredericks. In the future, how would uncrewed vessels affect port visits? Since you can't really board such ships, yet there's still some control mob ships, but there'll be fewer of them to ships today. Welcome to a problem we have to think about. Let's be honest. If you're if you're building uncrewed assets, they are great for warfighting. They are great. He'll go, they'll do disaster relief as well. How? They'll deliver supplies. But how will they unload the supplies when you get there? Where will the crews be who will operate the machinery you're taking out there as supplies? So optionally crewed assets might be a better argument for that scenario. But also it's something which they're going to have to work out, because I think at the moment there is almost... and this is going to sound strange for me to say. There is almost an obsession with war, and they're forgetting the jaw part of naval operations. They're forgetting the diplomacy part of it. And I think they can skip it, but actually, history has always shown you reduce the jaw, you make the war more likely. And that's a problem. That is a big problem. Why are these little flies coming in? 3 of them, and I got all 3. But I feel like there might be a 4th, and I haven't seen it, but I'm sure there is. Anyway. So anyway, what are your favourite polite ways to say pirate? Where does cargo acquisition specialist come from? That's always a fun one. There is also force procurement specialist as well. There is force acquisition. Maritime force acquisition, and a few other things as well that have come through over the years. There's been lots of interesting ones I've heard at times. I usually just go, pirate, and wind them up. Carl McGasberg, Falls on the project 22160 Vasily Bolkov. I don't know if he's not keen on buying NATO stuff. Look, the thing about Russia as an option in terms of buying ships is they're not really considered that. How do I put this politely? Look, their patrol vessels are useful, and you do have an option of buying it from them. But the thing about patrol vessels, and the problem for Russia in the patrol vessel market, is that increasingly people are looking at domestic options for patrol vessels. So they might want to go with the Russian design, but they want to build Russian design. There's also the problems that there have been a lot of issues for Russia in terms of where we're sourcing our components, where we're sourcing our diesel engines. And there are easier options to go from. You can go to Japan, you can go to China, you can go to Italy, you can go to... There are lots of nations around the world producing patrol vessels if you don't want to go down a more traditional NATO route. I know Italy is a NATO nation, but Italy is also very good at supplying things. Joe Fredericks, the Chinese variant of some of the destroyers still themselves have more VLS cells than some in Italian ships. Yeah, which Italian ships are you talking about? Are they destroyers or are they patrol vessels? Because if you're saying that a destroyer has more VLS than a patrol vessel, I'd hope it would. At the moment, I don't think Italy's actually building any destroyers. From memory, I can't think of a single Italian design under construction which is a destroyer. I can think of a few frigates. I can't think of a few destroyers. So, Fredericks, that's really not a good analysis to be starting putting out. That's kind of destroyer better than frigate. And nations not keen on buying NATO stuff tend to go and these days and buy... Well, there's quite a large market of stuff. There's usually Israeli, Singaporean, Indian. There's lots of... The defense market is a very wide market. And most of the stuff you're seeing people building domestically are international hot rods of a lot of different equipment. Also, the patrol vessels do differ from being basically a light frigate down to a patrol vessel, depending on their arms fit, which I've already discussed tonight when talking about them, the Founder reveals, because they are kind of a special example of, depending on what they're fitted with, they come out looking like a, wow, it's a light frigate that a Texan would like too. You still got quite a lot of guns, but you're not really the same thing, are you? And Korea is also another good source of ships. And they, is it the Philippine Navy Philippines who are basically being supplied by the Koreans at this point? This is the thing, this is one of the problems Russia is facing in terms of export market, in terms of warships. People don't have the limited options they used to. It used to be basically you could go to Russia supply system, or the NATO supply system. That was your choices. Nowadays, there's a lot of options. Not many of the former Soviet republics actually had large amounts of naval shipbuilding in them going on. Ukraine was basically the exception, which had a large number of shipyards in them. Most of the rest really didn't. So it is that the River Class DD is a Type 26 frigate with a Spy 7 radars glued on the top and a Canadian combat system. Exactly. KVG, Italy supposedly started. They've started very much the concept work of their DDX. The nicest way, again, until it's being built, we have no idea what's actually going on. It's kind of like, again, we've had this discussion recently about the British and the cancelling of Type 83s. They're not going to due to be ordered till the 2030s. There are going to be possibly at least one, if not two, general elections before we get to the point in which they're being ordered. Anything the current government discusses about them really has very limited impact. We'll see what happens. So, dude, what's some dumbest argument you've heard someone make against having ships for president's missions? Usually that it's not that the ship can't be of help in any way, which seems silly. They can be. So, Joe Frederick, isn't becoming a frigate navy the best case scenario for Russia realistically? I mean, pretending to service Slavas, Kirovs, and Kuznetsov isn't great, and building new ships unlikely. Look, a frigate navy, a Super Gorshkov navy, as I did in the video about the Russian destroyers and why they're not building them, is to an extent where they're heading to fill in for everything Udloy class and below. Okay? The trouble is, for Russia with no status assets, then they have a problem, diplomatically. We've talked about the status assets. Russia doesn't view themselves as a regional small power. They expect to be treated as something different. They expect to have an impact. They expect to be counted on the world stage. If you don't have the ability to turn up a status asset, you don't really get it. You're not going to have the same impact. You're not going to have the same ability to influence things. And at a certain point, that's going to lead to Russia doing things. Look at their recent wars, their recent efforts. A lot of stuff has happened because Russia has felt that they were being slighted, that they were being weakened, that people weren't paying them enough respect, enough attention. I don't want to see a scenario where Russia is feeling that on a global level, because I don't know how they're going to react. I'd rather see them as part of the global system where they are actually involved in it than, fumbling around. Fredericks, again, and I'm trying to not turn this into a one-on-one conversation, because it's a live video of lots of people involved, but you have responded. So I'm being careful about this, but I'm pointing this out before we can turn this into a whole one-on-one conversation. The point is, they can keep the Kirovs running for a bit, and that is a decision, again, as I explored in the video. Basically said, look, that's part of their calculation they made. They're short of war-fighting assets and status assets at the moment, but they can keep the status assets running for a little bit longer. But it only counts for so long. That they can only carry on for so long. Those hulls are old. They're 40 years old. You want another 20 years, they're going to be even older. They're going to be getting closer to closer, because they are high 40s as it is. They're going to be getting closer to 70. They can't go on that long. No, I think you're mistaken. Superpower is defined as a nation having enough nuclear weapons to blow up the Earth, at least once over. Russia still maintains that. They're still therefore a superpower. A global power is a power which has the ability to reach the whole globe with conventional warfare capability and have an effect on the world. There actually were more global powers than there were superpowers. They'd gone down to a while where, for a while, especially while Russia was economically suffering, realistically America was the world's sole global power, which was also a superpower, which is why they had so much status. There was China, which is another superpower, but really not a global power, because they couldn't really affect the world conventionally with conventional weapons on a global level at the time. Even now, I would suggest that they have a theoretical capability to do it, but they still don't have really the logistics and infrastructure in place to actually carry it out on a long term, or perhaps even a short term basis. They could certainly reach places, but how long they can be there for is a different matter. That's not saying they won't get it, that's just saying it takes time to build up the assets to do these things. It is not a quick overnight of, I want the ships! No, you have to build the ships, train the crews, develop the systems which command and control them, and work it out all together. It's not something that just happens. And the thing is, France is also a global power. Britain was included in the list of global powers. Still, technically is, and please note I'm saying technically. At certain points I would look at the British governments and go, "You've managed to cut that to pieces. We're no longer that either." And global power status was more important for UN membership, for UN Security Council membership, than superpower status. Originally. So yeah. That's the fun things with those ones. Calvin Gersberg. Planned ship longevity. Have the first Type 52s faring. Interesting. But again, also, there's a different. At the time when she was being built, she was a very special ship, and they were focusing a lot of assets on her. One of the things you're watching now is the sheer volume of ships they're building, and it's when you've got more volume building, that's when things can start to sneak in as being problems. So we'll see what happens. And LVMO72. The Japanese had 28 40-inch turrets. What if they standardized them along lines of the British did to the 50-inch, and then Vanguard on mid-30s, 35,000 ton, 20 hulls? What happens? They have some very interesting, very capable assets. Very interesting, very capable assets. If they can do that. And again, it's giving them permission to build them and having the infrastructure to build them. No one likes that measure of superpower status, but it is it. Right, which nations are most susceptible to humane missions as starting points for LHs? Probably South American nations at the moment. Anyway, as we got through these questions, let's get back to the slides. So let's make that disappear. Minimize that for a second. Maximize this. Now we'll start talking about the various navies. Okay, so now the US Navy is always a great example to get to in naval diplomacy because they apparently have the most layers at the moment. They don't have any frigates, but they do have the Coast Guard, and they do have various ships which they can use for doing lower level presence missions. Then they have a massive Burks. Theoretically some Tychos, but let's be honest, there aren't really enough of them to go around. And then they have the carriers, and they have LHDs. So they theoretically have layers for diplomacy. The trouble is, pretty much the answer to every situation is a buck. And the problem is almost as often in terms of some of these diplomacy things. If you are tracking down someone who is if you're tracking down a ship, carrying drugs, a Arleigh Burke destroyer is kind of overkill. A flight-free Burke with its 5-inch gun, its 96 VLS cells, its ability to carry 2 helicopters, multiple fast boats. If that is tracking down a drug smuggler, you have a problem. It can do the job, but it's kind of using a very expensive asset to smash a walnut. Where is my sledgehammer? Let me go grab my sledgehammer. I need to make this point. 4-5! Where are you? This is your book. It is an extremely good sledgehammer. It is a very capable warfighting tool. And for diplomacy missions, like if you want to show someone how powerful America is, if you want to make the statement that, you know, come and have a nice diplomatic dinner on my ship, it is a wonderful tool. But if I want to, I don't know, crush up my medicine tablets in terms of the thing, it'll do the job. It'll do it very well. It's a bit too much. The closed captioning is the best. It cracks me up. I don't want to read it, German. I really don't. I'm worried about it. But the thing is, this is it. This is your book. And it's incredibly capable at many tasks. You can use a sledgehammer to knock in nails. It's far easier to use a 24-ounce hammer, though. Or a 16-ounce hammer, depending on what you're doing. But it can be done. And so, this is a scenario which America finds itself in quite regularly. I think this is one of the reasons why the Coast Guard gets used for so many international diplomacy missions, but also one of the reasons why the Americans have real trouble at the moment with their procurement. Because their submarine procurement is running pretty much okay. They're not producing enough, but they're producing more than other people, the Virginias. But you can't really use submarines for diplomacy missions. Now, this is something which comes up quite regularly. I keep being told the future of navies is underwater. And the argument goes, yeah, the only way ships are going to survive is if they become submarines. Well, A, we've been having that argument for roughly 120 years, and so far it hasn't gone away in that time and hasn't succeeded in that time. But you never know, it might change. But the reality is, to my mind, surface ships are going to be around as long as you need to do naval diplomacy in peacetime, humanitarian aid, all those missions, far easier to do from a surface ship than on a submarine. And in wartime, there are scenarios where it is more important to be able to defend something else which is visible than hide from the attack. More important to defend something which is visible. I talked to you a couple of weeks ago in a video about the limitations of stealth. How producing a stealth ship is great for an offensive asset. But if you need to protect a convoy, your stealth frigate is not really as helpful as your heavily armed frigate. Anything which has resulted in your frigate cutting its weapons for stealth is not going to help when it is trying to defend something which can be found. As I've explained before in the scenario, basically, you have two options for warfighting. When you can hide or you can fight. You can hide an ambush, or you can fight with overwhelming firepower. If you're in a situation where you have to fight, where you cannot hide because you're protecting a convoy, or carrying an amphibious assault, or protecting a carrier battle group, or something like that, then what you need is firepower. Because whilst a little bit of stealthing in terms of reducing your own particular radar image to make you slightly more difficult to pick out in the mess is going to be a bit helpful. What is mostly going to be helpful is carrying a absolutely, and I cannot overstate this, an absolute shit ton. Yeah, a shit ton of weapons. That is more helpful. But if you go and check out the comments on the recent videos I've done, you will find all these comments in there. You will find all these comments turning up again and again and again from people. And yes, there is the part of me which wonders if they're bots or if they are people who are just trying to be trolls. But the thing is, I hear those comments not just in debates on YouTube channels, and not just in Discord discussions, but I hear them in actual face-to-face discussions when I go to events, when I go to conferences, when I go to conventions, and I hear people having these discussions, and I'm going, no, okay, let's have this over. And the person was honestly, one person in the last convention I went to where I had this argument, was honestly telling me, don't worry, because future merchant ships were all going to have to go underwater as well, because that's the only way they were going to be able to be safe in wartime, so they would have to be built. So basically, their idea was you were going to build 40,000 TU container ships that were submarines. Anti-piracy has never been the job of the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard are supposed to look after your own local areas. If you're talking about doing anti-piracy in the Mediterranean or in the Indian Ocean, that was actually the foundational job of the US Navy. You know, the US Navy's original job was to go after the pirates in North Africa. That's what they were set up for, so, yeah. So, I want someone... This was a very serious gentleman who also had the joy to remind me that he was a former submarine commanding officer and had more experience of naval warfare and naval than I ever would, and more understanding of the future of naval world than I ever could at my young age. He also said, though, by the way, those container ships will be nuclear powered. So they'd be nuclear-powered 40,000 TEU submarine container ships. Yeah. Oh, he had a full display. This was the convention. I wandered up and went, why is there a merchant ship drawing of a... I was basically drawn in by the large submarines and thinking, that's some interesting design work. What are they doing for? Because... here was me. The really sensible one was they had an underwater, they had a seabed mining submarine, and that looked really quite interesting and could conceivably be useful for work for going around and doing some operations on the seabed, for setting stuff up down there, etc. As we move into deeper parts of the ocean for resource acquisition. I could see that coming in, but it didn't stop there, and that's the trouble. It didn't stop in the part where this might actually be interesting at work, too. It went to, oh, good lord. Oh, God, no, I did not, Malaga. No, not a reformer. Oh, no, not a... it was fun. But anyway, so the point is, the US Navy has these issues. They have a real issue. And I think this is one of the reasons why you see things like the Defiant-class battleship, why you see the current frigate option to look at. Let's be honest, I would argue the frigate option they're going with, which is the variation on the National Security Cutter, is basically a classic maritime security counter-piracy platform. And honestly, it's almost an American equivalent to the River class. Or maybe the founder of Reveal PPAs, the full ones. It is a very light frigate. And it is designed as such, and there's nothing wrong with that. But it is for the maritime security questions that they are going to have to deal with. Because keep sending a Burke to track these things down is extortionate. And they can't keep running the Burkes ragged. Because again, the more you have the Burkes doing that, the less training they can be doing, the less maintenance they can be doing, the more they're having to run off and do that rather than to protect a carrier battle group. And then you have to look at the things like, when we're talking bigger, the thing is, as I put here, your solution is, I will send an individual Burke, or I send a group of Burks, or I send a carrier battle group or amphibious task group. Realistically, you want something else you can send, and that's where the Defiant class and all the larger ships, it was the strike cruiser. It's been generations of ships that the Americans have tried, and the American Navy has tried to propose as basically their big diplomatic ship to send to go, excuse me, this is a status ship turning up. This is an asset. The next thing that turns up is something which is going to, we have to pay money for a carrier battle group to come all the way here, we're going to start bombing things. So please, take note of me, listen to me as I ask you to be peaceful. You might go, well, does America really need that ship? Well, that's the kind of trouble. When you're a major power and you have lots of interests, you end up needing those types of ships. You're either interested in world events and are going to be affected by them, or you accept that world events are going to affect you and you have no control of them. That is basically the difference between power status. The nations which don't have the power to influence world events and therefore have no effect over what they can do to them, they just have to accept them and deal with them when they come to them, or the nations which are able to influence world events. And you don't have to be a superpower to be able to do that. You do possibly have to be a global power, but at least a major regional power, and for all those scenarios you're going to need gradiated systems of diplomacy. Joe Freddy, I think some people forget that container ships are supposed to be for profit. Building submarine container ships would be in conflict with our first mission. Yeah! Just thinking also about the extent of the crew. Doesn't mean the River class destroyer, means the British River class OPV. Yes, I should clarify that. I meant the River class OPV. This is the trouble. There are too many British-inspired navies going around the world with too many river classes, okay? It gets quite disturbing. Well, Popular Mechanics 94, link in the comment if you want to. Put a link into Discord. It's always easier. YouTube doesn't like links, and because I have various restrictions on links, because remember we went through that phase where we kept getting the... how do I put this? Persons of negotiable virtue advertisements going on in the channel. When we kept getting those, I had to turn on pretty strict link protections to stop them getting through on YouTube. And I haven't ever turned them off because they might come back. So, in this case, I'll just say, can you post it to Discord Discord to Wayne, rather than YouTube, because I don't want to deal with the things of that, the persons of negotiable virtue turning up again. I forget, the only power that didn't need such ships was Imperial Roma's height. There wasn't any opponents with big ships. No, there wasn't. That was a small problem for them when actually navies did turn up and they couldn't really adjust to having it again. But they still had quite a few King Marines going around. And their equivalents throughout the ages. Then I've got the Japanese Navy. Now, the Japanese Navy exists for three reasons when it comes to naval diplomacy. One, they do quite a lot of humanitarian relief missions. They really do a lot of that stuff. Thank you, Wayne. Two, they are really doing the sales at the moment. And let's be honest, we see that and go Mogami, and we consider Mogami sales it. No. Not just Mogami. It is also the mast. The mast has been sold to the Indian Navy. Various systems and missiles. Japanese missiles are under a lot of luster at the moment. Because it's been found out a lot of the American missile systems, and some, the Americans might not have still available how to build some of their older versions of their missiles. The Japanese still can, and modernize those systems. So if you're not fitted to take the latest version of the missile system, you can buy, if you don't have your own construction capabilities, you can buy those missiles which have been, to an extent, modernized a bit in their design from the Japanese. And the Japanese will show you this when they come to visit you, and you'll go, yay, I like this. It is also about relationships, okay? Japan is a nation which has gone for naval diplomacy, is very big on relationships. But it kind of fits. If you've ever, and I was really quite surprised, because I was sitting down, I've heard about Japanese salesman, culture in Japan, their sort of work life, and I didn't really believe it. And while we was over there, I managed to sit down and chat with some people in Japan who are involved in that's their daily life, and yeah, for them it is perfectly normal to make a call to a fellow business that they usually sell to, just to go and say hello. Basically, they have a standing appointment where they go round, they say hello, they have tea, they exchange greetings, and they update themselves on each other's lives, and they keep in contact. For them, the idea of maintaining a relationship by social interaction is perfectly normal, even as part of business. Unsurprisingly, therefore, their Navy places a very high premium on this as part of its naval duties. The Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force really does go in for this of, we are going to visit these people, we're going to go say hello. And that is a sensible thing to do. Again, going and visiting other nations is your relationship building. It's how you keep the relationship going. It is a presence mission in business, and it's a presence mission the Navy does. It's one of the really fun things. When you're explaining the presence mission in Japan, and one night while I was there, and this was actually after everyone else had gone off, I ended up giving a lecture, which I was kind of surprised I ended up doing, but I ended up giving a lecture. Everyone had left. It was my last night in Japan. And one of the friends we made out there went, Alex, will you come talk about presents, etc. and things to these people? Okay, fine, I'll wander along. I have nothing else to do, and frankly, I'm hungry, and you're offering me dinner. I'm going to turn up. And I turned up. And I ended up giving a lecture about presents. And talk about it. Just 30 minutes chat, basically. And they put everything into their sales, for their version of sales. And it was amazing about a lot of the naval diplomacy stuff is, for them, is very understandable because it's business relationships. And that is the thing. These are where they go to maintain. This is something they understand. They readily accept that that this is how you maintain a relationship. This is sensible. And you then sort of start talking about it. Well, when you're talking about putting together an alliance, when you're putting together when you're putting together a business partnership, or putting together a project where you're bringing together the subcontractors and the prime contractor and maybe the client, you've got to piece together what is basically a task group. And it works far better if these people all have a relationship with each other, of at least something, what I would call a professional plus relationship, than if they have no knowledge of each other. They are far more likely to be able to adjust to each other's needs, to work out what each one brings to the table. And so, for them, this was perfectly natural. This was perfectly understandable. And it was a lot of fun, but it also was, to me, a bit of an insight into what you're really going to start seeing in probably taking place in Southeast Asia, in Australia, in even India, from now on, and have already been seeing to an extent, if you start looking at them, in terms of they are going to be going and visiting these places. They are going to be turning up regularly. LOB. Italy did the same thing with the Frema Perno and the US Constellation class and PPAs and Indonesia. Yeah, they did. But the thing is, the Japanese are going to keep this going. So this is my point. I remember making this when I was talking about the AUKUS destroyer project, and the guys are going, right, so you'd be talking about a joint Anglo-American, Australian, and I immediately included Japan in it. Because in reality, I think Australia, Britain, Japan working together on a destroyer program would be very, very sensible and produce a very effective unit. Add in Italy, and you have a really good force and a really good group, because each one's bringing different things to the table which are useful. The thing is, if you think about it, all those nations are quite happy to do a lot of naval visits, and quite used to doing naval visits. This is about building connections, building links between each other. Lions, could those countries actually work the same vessel, or would it be more standard-based? I think what you'd end up with is a similar hull architecture, probably a similar engine profile, and probably some difference in terms of weapons fit, but probably very similar structuring. It's an interesting one. And then we have the Indian Navy. Now, the Indian Navy is one of those navies which is unsung a lot in diplomacy. But if we're talking about their naval diplomacy and countries visit, and this is something which India actually makes a massive effort into. So, in 2013, they visited 9 countries. In 2014, they did 15 countries. In 2015, it was 31 countries. 2016, 29 countries. 2017, 36 countries. 2018, 34 countries, including the Falkland Islands, which was considered underneath that and the United Kingdom was considered one country. They visited both. They also included the Reunion Islands as well as France itself. In that as one country. And then 2024, 24 countries, 2025, 24 countries, 2026, 21 countries. And that's growing. Okay? They've already visited 21 countries. We are in August 2026. That is the reality of it. India is doing a massive range of deployments. They have training ships going out to visit people. They have warships going out to visit people. Often the Talwar class are doing a lot of the work of diplomacy. And why? Why are the Indians doing this? Why are the Indians going out and visiting? Because they're building relationships. They're building up presence. They're making India very much accepted as being part of the local background, part of the scenery. And that matters. If you consider, at one point you have Delhi, Tabar, Trishul and Deepak, which is their fleet tanker, basically wandering around. And they do in September, I think it is, when is it? 2015? September 2015. They visited United Arab Emirates, Dubai, they did Myanmar in Bahrain, they did Jebel in Saudi Arabia, they did Kuwait City in Kuwait, they did Doha in Qatar, and Muscat in Oman. And that was a round of diplomacy which they carried out in, I think it was 17 days? A little over 2 weeks. A little over 2 weeks, they hit 6 nations. And that is the thing. That, by the way, is the Trekand. In the same year, that visited Djibouti, Haifa in Haifa in Israel, Plymouth in the UK, Toulon in France, Istanbul in Turkey, and Safka in Egypt. And that did August and October. It also did a few other places it wandered around on its route out and route in. That is useful. That is helpful. That is a lot of presence being generated. That is a lot of turning up and going, hello, meet us. When we go to this year, and it is worthwhile going to this year, and by the way, if you want to go and track this down, I know I don't normally say this, but there is actually a fairly good Wikipedia article, which is kept up to date by some really cool editors, on where Indian Navy's visiting. And what I like about that particular article is that it's a really good source list. And you all know the rule. You can't cite and use Wikipedia as an academic because it has no author you can hold responsible for if anything goes wrong. But well-written Wikipedia articles which have lots of articles in them that you can go and reference, you can go and cite, are really useful. Now, the thing is, if we consider them, they've done, from Southern Naval Command, the Sudashimi, which is their sail training ship. Okay? It visited Oman, it visited Egypt, Malta, France, Morocco, Spain, Cape Verde, Antigua, United States, on its lovely journey. It was there, and I think till June. I now think it's wandering off again. And the Trekand, this vessel, has been wandering around again. It did Port Louis, Mauritius. It did Port Victoria in Seychelles. It did Maputo in Mozambique. Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. Mombasa in Kenya. It's wandering around doing all those visits. And this is something they've got going on. They are doing this work because it is useful for them. And then we ask the question of, how come India keeps doing quite well with the arms sales? How come India is growing its diplomacy? How come India is having more and more of an impact on the world stage? Because they're doing the work, they're putting in the effort, they're showing people, we turn up, we're part of it, we visit you regularly. We're part of the scenery here. We're part of the fixtures and fittings. So we now have a say in what's going on. And our say will matter. Now, if you're asking why they have those ASW rocket launchers, etc., things on board, just think about the discussions we've been having ourselves recently about drones and underwater, uncrewed, undersea assets and their smallness and trying to deal with them. I'd say those systems could be pretty useful in terms of dropping something straight in the water in front of them and going, you want to try and get through it? Now, is it for hunting an SSN? No. But your submarine threat has changed now. It's got far more of a spread than it used to. And a submarine threat which is a spread requires a spread of responses. Now, when those systems were put on originally, they were for the dealing with the SSNs. I will admit, they are. But the thing is, now their continued existence and service is probably based on other things. Hello, YouTube Minecraft watcher. Neither on YouTube nor watching Minecraft. Again. Sorry. Just found something which is really weird. I'll deal with that later. Well, I guess the cheaper finding. Yeah, that's the thing. Is some of the older weapons are coming back in, and then, as we've talked about before with this, with the whole, they keep trying to basically reinvent the wheel, and most of the Western technology and most of the stuff you'll see, discourse on the internet you'll see, is about the new weapon system to deal with these new threats. Some of the old weapon systems work quite well to deal with them. Now, if we then go from them, you've got Italy. Italy's another good example. Italy's diplomacy, though, naval diplomacy, well, they send their warships, they send them around the world, and they do a lot of presence missions on them, but they also have this. This is the Amerigo Vespucci. This is the ship which, when it turns up, you remember. The food on board her is exquisite. Her sailing around the world is not so much selling naval capabilities of Italy, although it certainly does demonstrate many, many capabilities. Her sailing around is representing the culture of Italy. She's not just selling you... Let me put it this way. She's one of the few warships which turn up. You stick Ferraris next to her, and the Ferraris look out of place, not the warship. She turns up, she is a presence. The Italians spend an inordinate amount of money making sure they keep her in absolutely tip-top condition. It was a warship back in its day. It is now a sailing example of beauty. And that is its advantage. Basically, its close equivalent in British terms was when Britain had the Royal Yacht Britannia. And so this thing sails into harbour, and I've seen this happen in London a couple of times and a few other places. Basically, it sails into harbour, and Italian diplomacy goes into overdrive. You will think you have wandered into Italy around it. There will be every store, every company which is selling Italian stuff in that area will have people there. They will invite people to the dinners. They will invite people to the tours. They'll invite people to a concert. They will have everything aboard it. It will be the biggest centre of Italian diplomacy you have ever met. I have watched people go in who have got hardened positions of what they're going to argue with in terms of diplomacy, in terms of meeting agreements with Italy, and leave having agreed to everything the Italians wanted. They will also have Italian foods on board, and here is the other thing. Okay, so it's officer cadets running around, and they will be running around doing the waiting, taking care of people, providing the service. You have never met a more polite, better dressed, more capable people than they will turn up to be. I swear they have etiquette lessons built into them. They have been lovely every time I've been aboard. I remember it. I remember the cheese. I remember the meat. I remember the little examples of pizza, little mini pizza sort of things they were serving at one point, and the various other options. It was amazing. It was the nicest pizza I have ever had in my life. I honestly didn't eat pizza for about 8 weeks afterwards because I didn't want to erase the flavour of that pizza from my mind. because it was so light, so perfect, such a beautiful pizza. They are Joel Frederick's inferior training ship, yes. They are crewed by cadets. It is amazing. If ever you hear this ship is coming nearby you, try, I don't care how you do it, try your best to get aboard and experience one of the evenings. You will not be disappointed. You also come away with a lasting love of Italy, which can only be increased by when you see one of their warships go by and literally is just festooned with weaponry. They do. It is a super weapon of diplomacy. And it is amazingly capable at that job. Excuse me a second. Just going to close the windows before all the flies come in. Gonna go off and do that one through there. Here a second. But it is a wonderful example of naval diplomacy, and Italy builds us up with, you will have, this is actually a rare visit. This is a very high status vessel visit. Okay? This for Italy is the equivalent of them sending an aircraft carrier to visit you. Probably has more of an impact than that. Again, Royal Yacht Britannia is a good example. This thing turns up. The fun thing I found about was, the best account I found of the visit to London of this ship was actually written by a journalist and published in a newspaper in Finland. So the event was taking place in London, where this ship was visiting, and the best write-up was done in Finland of the event in London. That is the impact of this vessel. That is the thing, is you get the impact going as far as Finland from London of that, and people going, wow, the Italians, oh, the food was really lovely, the crew are really well trained, it's a really smart ship. Of course it's not a warship, but you know, it's their navy, it shows anything. And that is the impact. Lions, a 6-star Italian hotel powered by sail, from what you're saying. Pretty much. But that is the reality. There are other ships, other nations have ships like this. They do. And they are good. But this is the gold star. This is the one they're all aiming to be like. Because this is the best of those ships. This is the thing that when it sails in the UK, even British politicians, even our Treasury officials, start thinking, should the Royal Navy get back in the sail training ship game? Or rather, get into it, seeing as they've got out of it for the last 100 years. It is special. Hello, Ola Greg. Enjoy the Houston Horror Festival. So, yeah, this is the equivalent of, and I do like that phrase, this is a naval diplomacy nuke. This turns up, you're about to experience naval diplomacy on a scale and equivalent you will never experience in any other situation. So, my advice is she is expected in New York that was July, and yeah, she's in Montreal, Canada, actually, until the 3rd of August is where she is, but there is Tor Vespucci. And you can usually find where she is going, where she is sailing. They have websites for her. They tell you where she's going, and she's on her North American tour for 2026. If you're interested in her, This is it. I'll also put a link down below. But, you know, I'm not sure where she's going after the 3rd of August. But she is supposed to still be wandering around a bit. And they update it every year. They have the various tours she goes on and what she does. Track it down. If it's coming in your direction, you want to be there. You want to experience it. Because once you do, you'll go, okay. I now get this all. And I'm now mildly depressed that my nation doesn't have an equivalent capability to this. Anyway, also she also gets hit on by US aircraft. Yes, she's been hit on by more aircraft. Basically, US aircraft carriers approach her and tell her they're in love on a semi-regular basis. I'm sure it's at least 2, and possibly as many as 4 have now done this. There are pictures of her with various US aircraft carriers at certain points, and basically the US aircraft carrier is sending out messages of, "We love you, you're beautiful." Look, the fact is, I don't think she's in. I'm surprised about the sheer amount of computer games she's not being included in, because the one I'm really surprised. For some reason, as a lane, she's a light aircraft carrier, I think. And I'm not sure why. I'd have left her as this and just given her so much power of diplomacy that she could basically dominate the world. We'll leave that to one side. And, you know, various other things. She should really... I think she'd be a good asset to have in World of Warships. Just the player who plays it is just so beautiful you can't... You actually get negative points if you fire at this ship. I think that'd be a really cool inclusion in a game. Basically, this ship sails around. If you actually shoot at this ship, you get negative points and start to lose the battle. But yeah, she is a good ship. She is a very beautiful ship. I will add that in, that link. The things I add in. I've got more conversation with plan officers when our sailing ship visited Shanghai than when their Type 55 visited Jakarta. Yes, you will. In a nice way, the sailing ship shows up, they will pay attention and be chatting away with you. Anything to stay aboard the cool sailing ship. Drummer, a free instrument, the gunner wouldn't fight, you'll lose the war. We can sink it, yes, we don't want to. It'll make us look too bad. Swedish Navy. Now, this is one of the interesting things, again, this is talking about the stealth ship. This is a very the Visbys are incredibly striking assets. When they turn up, no one questions who they belong to. We all know they're the Swedish ships. But the trouble is, when you start trying to do diplomacy, they don't have a lot of space on board. And it's one of the really interesting conversations I've had recently with people about Sweden's new acquisition. They're getting larger ships. They're of course currently torturing the French, their acquisition. And when I say torturing the French, here's the example I give. Okay, so they're buying the French-built design, the Frigate d'Intervention, which is a lovely design. But you have to remember, Sweden has a history. Volvo and Saab both wound up their American owners to a massive extent by insisting on going their own way and completely reinventing things. And The French, I think, are currently starting to experience the joy of having the Swedes as customers. The Swedes, A, do not want your standard FDI. They want it customized. And B, they want those customizations done to their standards. And as much as I love and have driven many French cars in my life, there's a reason I've stuck with Volvos more often than not. And I have noticed there is a small difference between the standards Volvo tend to require for certain things and the standards that French cars are quite happy to accept and are perfectly fine. So, good luck! That's what I say to the builders of the frigates in France. Good luck! But no, this is a striking-looking ship. It's very visible. Sweden's here, and they've got a mean-looking ship. It's cool. And then you go aboard, and you realise it's not got a lot of space. You can't really do diplomacy. You don't really have the space to actually have meetings, to actually host things. And so it's a very good example of a navy which has got an excellent war-fighting asset, but not necessarily a full-spectrum conflict management asset or naval diplomacy asset. And that's a problem. That is a problem. And the Swedes have realised that's a problem. That is, we're talking about the fact that part of the reason they have gone with the frigates is obviously because they're taking on the NATO role. They're being part of NATO, and so they have to step up into that mission as well. But also, part of the reason they're going for it is, honestly, they want to be able to do more. They want to have a more of a general purpose capability. I know, Lions just put it's a thoroughbred warhorse instead of a general purpose draft horse. No, it's basically what you're talking about here is a racehorse, a really good racehorse, but it's a racehorse versus what I would call a stable pony, which can do some jumping, but it's not really a jumper, but it can do a limited amount of jumping. It can do a little bit of some of the horse dressage, a little bit of that with its, it's usually something which my teenage cousins will start off with as their first horse. It will the whole thing will end up doing a lot of various things, and then that horse will be their favorite horse for life, and then they will add on probably a jumper, then eventually a dressage horse, and by the end of it they've got 5 horses, and they're about 25, and you're sitting there going, oh my lord, you spend more time in the stables than you do in any other place. I love them dearly, but seriously, if we put together the sheer volume of horses which my family seems to own at certain points is worrying to me. Not given too bad the Swedes went all the way down to a Corvette Navy on frigate name. Frigate counterpart of the Visby class would have been really interesting. Yes, and also, but the thing is that's interesting is they're getting back in these frigates. And currently they've got 4 in order. There are discussions where they might actually end up with more than 4. Which is a scenario if they end up with 6 or 8. That'd be interesting. But the other thing above it is there's also a conversation going, do they need a status ship as well for diplomacy? Do they need something which has that level of a national flagship for diplomacy? And also for warfighting capability. As something which can lead convoys in the Baltic, which can lead operations, which they can command operations from. And has that much more firepower in Swedish ideas. I've been interested because, of course, I did a video recently on the Swedish Navy. And I'd put some stuff in there which I'd heard, and then since that video's come out, I've been hearing a lot more, because people have been getting in contact going, including one conversation which literally went along the lines of, Alex, how the frigate did you work out that was going on? And I went, well, I've heard this and this bit, so I put them together. And the Swedes did traditionally usually have at least a couple of status assets as well as their solid warships. And they're building solid warships. The Visbys were a solid warship. The frigates, the FDIs, are going to be solid warships. Capable of doing more diplomacy than the Visby, but they're solid warships. They don't have a status asset. And the thing is, a status asset is your ability to go a little bit higher when you decide something which is going to carry a little bit more impact and a little bit more hello. Now, the thing you have to realise about Sweden when it comes to defence procurement, and each country has their slightly their own culture and temperament when it comes to defence procurement. The Swedes never do something by half measures. The moment they decide to get back into something or to do something, they will do it fully. Okay? The Swedes went for a very defensive orientated sea denial force built around the stealth corvettes and submarines. They are now moving towards a sea control force because of the need to operate. They're going to have still sea denial capabilities, but they want to have sea control in order to support their NATO missions, etc. That is a different scenario. If Sweden is going sea control, if they go fully in, which they tend to do when they go in, then the larger number of frigates and the status asset starts to make sense. And whilst it would require probably a growth in naval power to do so and deliver it, although they probably do put some of these assets into reserve status or rotate them around through their reserve forces, because they often do put things in reserve, which are quite capable assets, it is a scenario I can see where they go for it, because the Swedes don't do things improperly. I tend to use it as the IKEA methodology. If you think about it, when you're building an IKEA flat pack, there is nothing which is extraneous. There is everything which is needed for that mission, for that table, for that shelf, for that thing. It's what is needed. A little bit of insurance with the pieces that some of the fiddly small bits. A little bit extra of that, but everything which is needed. If it's not needed, it's not there. But if it's needed, it is there. And if you're going into sea control scenario, and you're going to be providing a large component of the sea control force in the Baltic for resupply, for maintaining control of the Baltic when you're trying to resupply places like the Baltic states and those sort of things in any sort of scenario where that goes hot, and also using these assets as part of their naval diplomacy force, not having a status unit suddenly becomes the thing you're not doing. And so that's an interesting policy going on there. That's an interesting potential there with Sweden. Now, this means we've got to our last one. This is the embarrassing one of nations. It really is. It's the embarrassing one. Okay, it's Britain. Our naval diplomacy assets, which we are currently still fitting out, they're the Type 31s. If you look at what Britain's talking about, the Type 26s are about warfighting. They really are. The Type 45s do diplomacy, but they are not status assets, but they are not far off in terms of how we're trying to use them. But they are not big enough or powerful enough to really be status assets, but we keep trying to use them that way because we don't have enough carriers and we don't have status units otherwise. And then you have the Type 31s, which are going to be the diplomacy elites. They're going to be the ones which are going to be forward-based. They're going to be taking over from things like Type 23s and the Type 23s are now being withdrawn, but the stuff we usually keep in the Middle East, etc. They're going to be supporting the River class OPVs in the Far East and those sort of things. This is why we probably need to build a Batch 3 River class to support. So the Batch 2s can withdraw to carry out the functions around the UK, and the Batch 3s can take over the duties in the Far East, in the South Atlantic, in the Mediterranean, where we need to have forward presence on an ongoing basis. The thing is, this is a nice plan. I don't know if it's going to be executed. Because those same frigates are also the flak frigates, which are basically Britain's insurance against a drone future when they were being built, as the thing which you could park next to something like an aircraft carrier, and you could put up a wall of metal between that aircraft carrier or tanker or something and incoming swarm of threats. Relatively inexpensively, you could stick up a wall of metal. They're still not in service. Now, here's a really sad thing. When you consider it, and you look at the Royal Navy issues that have happened, there's not only been a devaluing of the Navy, but there's been devaluing of the relevance of diplomacy happening, whilst there's also been growing. You think about it, Britain's been stepping forward in using its naval power to do more diplomacy in the Far East, basing the Batch 2 rivers out of Singapore, all these sort of operations, to increase presence, increase capability, increase our understanding. We've been doing visits to Japan and the Far East to cover when there were shortages in F-35 availability in terms of carriers in Southeast Asia. We've been doing all sorts of operations as diplomacy, as part of our ability to show our allies how useful we are, how friendly we are, how viable we are. And yet there's been a chronic underinvestment in actually building ships and actually maintaining those ships, and this is why we're in trouble. Britain is a nation which is suffering because it has had a lot of people with a lot of bright ideas for the last few years. When we look at Italy, when we look at France, even when we look at Russia, they have got running programs, churning out ships. Not many in the case of Russia, but they're working up. But in the case of Italy, in the case of France, they've got them being built. Britain is running behind. Mostly because it kept putting off making decisions. Because you see, the British government has found a great wheeze, which you should watch your own nations for. They invest in research and development. They keep investing in research and development. They keep investing in research and development and promising jam tomorrow. Because it's going to develop something better, something better, something better, something better, something better, something better. And then they never actually make a decision and actually buy it. They're always pushing for something new. Now, if you happen to follow, I don't know, some of the people on Twitter that have been recently talking about the British drone program, which I did my own video about when I talked about the British Defence Investment Plan. I did a massive video on that. The Defence Investment Plan represents £5 billion worth of investment, roughly, over the next few years. And it's give or take different. If you're talking about currently unassigned money being put into it. And they keep talking about ordering some uncrewed assets to take up warfighting roles. And they haven't yet been ordered. Not going to be ordered. Not until probably the next Parliament. The next general election is 2029. Most of those orders aren't going to take place till then. This is why when people turn around and go, oh, don't worry, the Type 83 has been cancelled. It's been cancelled for now. It may return. The nicest way, the amphibious ship we're buying with the Dutch has been gone, returned, been gone, and returned again. Actually, no. It's been gone, returned, been gone, returned, been gone, returned. It's on 3 times, I think it's gone. And returned. The Type 45 is getting a massive amount of money spent on extending their life, and then they talk about getting rid of them. The replacement for them is, who knows what will happen. It's a mess. And consequently, our naval diplomacy is a mess. We had quite a concerted effort for a few years, and Type 31 and Type 26 won several programs because of that effort. There was lots of discussions about how great we were doing. We were doing so well, AUKUS has happened, and let's be honest, whilst people might talk about the Americans section building that, there's quite a large chunk of money coming to Britain, because quite a lot of stuff is being built in Britain for that, because the Americans don't have the capacity as well, you know. In a nice way, Australian steel is going to American submarines. The Brits are actually building components and sections of American submarines. But now, look what's happening. Everything's starting to collapse. Britain is almost an example of what not to do. In fact, it probably is an example of what not to do. And so, Britain does have quite a good history with naval diplomacy. But the thing is, to do naval diplomacy, you actually need ships in the water. And you could argue things started to go wrong when they cancelled the Type 45s. Last set of 3 of them, didn't build 9 or 12 as they originally planned, or 9 as they'd rejected to, and then 8. If they'd built them, we might have been in a better position. Yeah, we'd have 3 more hulls to share the efforts around, which would have had a consequential knock-on impact for things. That would have been useful. There's also the Type 23s. There were plans which could have seen another 4 or even 8 of them built over the 16 historically built, or 13 after the 3 were sold off. If you'd built 8 more Type 23s, that would probably kept that program running until you built the Type 45s, which would actually reduce the cost of Type 45s. If you'd built all 12 Type 45s, we would not be in the scenario now where we are down to, 3, 4 frigates actually, and the 6 Type 45s. Yeah, it's kind of stupid the situation we'll be in. Especially when you go back and look at the cost of the Type 23s when they were cancelled. What they were costing per unit to build. Basically, we actually ended up spending more to keep yards open and viable when they weren't building ships than we would have done if we'd paid for Type 23s. And that's the really strange thing. And we keep flirting the idea of building a new royal yacht. Why? Because we know we shot ourselves in the foot. Why do we know we shot ourselves in the foot with getting rid of the royal yacht? Because it was an accountancy decision. We know we made it because of an accountancy decision. And then we see this thing show up. And we had the diplomatic equivalent of it. The royal yacht was as good at causing a diplomatic event as the American Vespucci. It was pretty much the only ship which was equivalent in the capability of that. And admittedly, it was because it combined being a ship with also having royal family on it. We do understand that the only way it could actually equal this in terms of capability was we stuck members of the royal family aboard it and turned it into a massive society event as well as diplomatic event. But it worked! Britain is an example of a nation which has shot itself in the foot massively when it comes to naval diplomacy. And every single decision has been made with good intentions. We're going to get the best equipment in the future. We're going to save money. We can spend it on hospitals and schools and roads and infrastructure. And A, I haven't seen much spending going on those things, but there has been a lot of money in that direction, not a lot of spending. But B, when you consider the money you've actually saved versus what that money actually generated, what it in real terms provided the nation, you have shot yourselves in the foot dramatically. Having a royal yacht wouldn't really... The royal yacht is crewed by the Royal Navy. The Royal Yacht is the Royal Navy. The Royal Navy provide the crew, they supply the ship, they support the ship, they maintain the ship. It is naval diplomacy. Yes, the Royal Yacht is at its most powerful when there is a royal aboard. But the royal yacht was also used for doing trade missions and sometimes without royals aboard, and was still quite capable. So it was still quite effective. No, I was often in that LVM 702. Actually, British food is not that bad, and by people who were often served aboard the Royal Yacht. The British put in many ways their best chefs aboard. The Royal Navy chefs are not people to be ignored. They do some really, really nice cooking. I will say they did not necessarily keep to a strictly British cuisine. They were they were always showing off British ingredients, not necessarily British cuisine. They were very careful. It was very much, these are made with British ingredients, yes. But the menu might have been a little bit of, if you're in an Oriental setting, there might be a bit of Oriental food inspiration in there for the local palate, and yeah, there is a lot of stereotypes though about British food which are not quite correct. One of the things, it's really one of the strange things when you realise it. British temperature, the one reasons why France develops a lot more sauces than the British do is because the British tend to have better quality meat and they have better weather for storing meat. So the meat doesn't go off as quickly or doesn't start to smell as quickly, so you don't need to develop the sauces. But that means the French develop a finer culinary art, and the British are basically just relying on the ingredients. A lot of British food relies on the quality of the ingredients to actually be good, rather than necessarily the quality of the cooking. The Royal Yacht wasn't. The Royal Yacht was got rid of by Tony Blair, not by Margaret Thatcher. In nicest way, as I said before, I did a whole video on that. There has been no British government, left or right, who've been good for naval spending and naval defence investment, or defence investment generally, since 1990. The 1980s, probably. The sensible ones, the last sensible ones, probably the last John Major government, actually, was actually, broadly speaking, sensible in terms of numbers. It's a fun scenario once you start going for it, but there is an entire video on my channel dedicated to going through all that stuff. All the defence white papers and stuff since 1997, and it's yes, but Britannia was due to be replaced, Knight 6831, in previous plans, and then Blair retired without replacement. Matthew Keeling, no. I don't think you can even say they're better at defence investment than infrastructure investment. That's suggesting they might actually even be good. No, they're not good at any kind of investment. We've been over that one. Anyway, let's go to the Discord and see the questions that have come in. Do we know what the replacement would be exactly? It was going to be a modern built yacht. It was theoretically supposed to be about the same size with modern engineering. Probably a combined gas and diesel electric propulsion, those sort of things. Gas turbine for high speed. Diesel electric for most of its base power, but the sort of thing to show off British engineering, because that's when you're building a royal yacht. Yeah, you could build it with diesel engines and it will choose on more economically, but you kind of want to stick the gas turbine in because you want to show off your ability to build a gas turbine. And the diesels are not going to be British built, the gas turbines are. So that's the thing. Basically, it was. It's not the same as building a modern billionaire's yacht or something like that because it's got to have diplomatic, say, sort of a holding and standards of that. But it was going to have a helicopter hangar, going to have the command and control routes down the sort of way. Helicopter hangar was going for Royal Flight style helicopters, probably a couple of them. I think it was also going to potentially have space to take the cars with them. There was discussions. There were all sorts of discussions and designs around them. You can have a look. There's also been all sorts of ideas of making a sail ship and all sorts of fun things they've had with ideas over times. But, yeah, basically lots of people have lots of ideas on it. Joe Fredericks, as a follow-up question on historical hospital ships, seeing how they're useful in disaster zones, why can't Navy just define them as natural disaster assets? Well, okay, then you'd need more. The thing is, because hospital ships are going to be used constantly for various long-term things, if you want to have one available for disaster relief, that means you've got to have one which you are keeping operational, but are not doing on a long-term deployment. And that becomes money which is, it's not doing anything, it's just sailing around. That's the problem. Yeah, at the point at which she was got rid of, Dominic Buckley, don't worry. There's no... Britannia, at the time she get rid of, she's using heavy fuel oil, she's 45 years old, she needs to be replaced, don't get me wrong. But it was getting rid of her without a replacement, that's the problem. But yeah. Senator, how many future admirals will be stationed in Djibouti? Rather a large number. I can't really think about how many, but it's going to be a huge number. I'm forgetting, treasuries hate waste of money like ships being available for emergencies. They do. I've often tried to explain that a navy is kind of like the police force with constant patrol and assets ready to react to events. And if you think about when we're talking about police funding, again, you have the same problem. If you're trying to justify things like the armed response units in the UK, or the riot police, or the mounted police, who are useful for specific scenarios you really do want them in, they are a budget fight every time you have them to try and keep them and maintain them. They are an absolute non-stop budget fight. But the patrol police, usually you can get the funding for that. But usually what police ends up needing to do is trying to take the funding from there and use it to try and fund the other areas because of the way the funding works and comes in. Guys will detail how a naval mission of A in B can prevent C doing its stuff in B, or even encouraging D. I guess there's a miss. Oh, that's quite a standard thing. If you consider, again, the example I give is Belize. The British have done that a lot of time. Did that a lot of time with naval assets. It was basically race an aircraft carrier down there, fly a strike of aircraft over Belize of Buccaneers, and go, hello, to the next door neighbour. Do you really want to do this? Next door neighbour went, nope, we don't. We'll go away. That's happened a lot over the years. Basically, you send ships to do a port visit, or a flyover, or depending on how urgently. The flyover was happening because this is happening in the next few days. If something doesn't happen quickly, we can race a carrier there. If it's going to be happening in the next few weeks, we can have a port visit. We can schedule that. We can schedule an exercise. And basically it just shows, hey, this person's our friend. We are interested in what's going on as a region. We will get involved if we have to. That's it. That's literally all you're doing. It's like a case of, let's say... Okay. So, When I was at school, which is a long, long time ago, I had a friend, let's call him Tim. Hang on, I actually did know a few Tims. That's not really going to... let's call him Terry. Okay, Terry. And he was smaller than me in both directions, height and width. And he kind of stuck out because he was a redhead, let's say. Now, there might have been a gentleman in a couple of years ahead of us who was trying to assert his position in the school. And he decided he would do this by picking on my friend. And what I possibly did was I made sure that this person knew that this was my friend Terry. And whilst I was also a couple of years younger than that particular gentleman, I was just as big as him. And I was smiling at him while I was hanging out with my friend Terry. And I was smiling at this gentleman in such a way as to go, hello, I'm here. I'm sure the teachers will try and do something about it, but you might try and do something before the teachers can get involved. And if you do, don't worry. I'll be here, and I'll be smiling. Because by that point, I already had a reputation as being a prop forward. Which, if you don't play rugby, you won't know. But basically, prop forward in rugby is one of the big guys, usually at the front of the scrum. They are known for being, how do I put this politely? Very solid, immovable objects when they want to be. And that was the point. That was enough. He made a mistake, though, that particular gentleman. He then decided to pick on another of my friends, and yeah, that was a very bad mistake, because that was the friend who didn't need me to be smiling next to him to look after him. That was my friend who how do I put this politely? By 16 was competing nationally and internationally in karate. And for some reason, this particular gentleman hadn't looked this up. So, yeah. All I need to do for that one was go, yeah, he attacked my friend first. Please note, he attacked my friend first. That particular gentleman decided to leave the school, I think, from memory. It's a long time ago. It's many, many years ago. Did he suffer from a significant emotional event? It was certainly, from memory, it was very significant. It was the kind of significant where you don't know. It was kind of like... that particular friend reminds me of, again, if you've watched this channel, you'll know that one of my admins is a gentleman called Leslie. And he kind of like young Leslie in my mind. In terms of, because Leslie's someone who we know has done a lot of martial arts training. This now does Kyudo, the Japanese archery martial art. And, yeah. My friend was, that friend was like that. I think he was taken by his parents to go and visit someone to sort things out. Waiting to order sign text. Do Australia, British, Canadian, Norwegian Type 26 have space in your opinion? They do have the space for diplomacy, but they are very much warships. They are very much warships. They're not they are, in a nice way, they're not status ships. They're warships, and they have the space for diplomacy, but they are not. I do notice that Canada's been out without a status ship for a while, and you can tell it from their naval diplomacy. Norwegians don't really, and have never really gone down the status ship for diplomacy routes. Their coastal battleships were not really used for that role. Australia has Hobarts, and they have the Canberra class LHDs. They have basically the Canberras are their status ships, and they use them as such. For Britain, they have the Queen Elizabeth class. You know, that's sort of how it works, but they are good warships. Leslie, you are a nice person. We all agree you are a nice person. You are a very, very nice person. We also all agree we don't want to have an argument with you in a dark alley late at night. Joel Fredericks, what's your most unique diplomatic event story? Mine was an Indonesian staffer eating Swedish meatballs in a Polish contra event in a Polish embassy in North Korea. Mine took place in the US Embassy, where I was having a chat with a suspiciously aged head of the bar in the embassy. And the other three people involved in the chat were the Russian military attaché, who was drinking American beer, the French naval attaché, who was drinking Australian wine, and who was it? The Canadian naval attaché, or the Canadian attaché, a military attaché, I think he was a naval officer at the time, who was drinking I think it was vodka. He had a small glass of vodka. It was a clear alcoholic drink. It was probably vodka. A vodka-based, cocktail or something. That's me having Coke, and I was literally the only one drinking an American drink in the American embassy. And we were sitting there chatting. And we were chatting about frigate programs for some reason. It was a weird event. It was like I for some reason for a short while I ended up at like 5 different events, or possibly even 6, at the American Embassy in a row, and I have no idea to this day what I did to get on the list and B, to get invited to so many in a row. No, that was the drinks they ordered. Look, I developed a habit in embassy meetings of hanging out the bar. Why? 2 reasons. 1, I don't like dancing. 2, I don't particularly enjoy circulating around a room because I like to sit and watch a room. And I find I can accomplish circulating around the room and meeting all different people by sitting near the bar, because everyone eventually comes to me. Thank you, Jax. And Rob Massey is a good book. It's a good description of the scenario going on and of some of the weird stuff going on at the time. Lions. How appealing would a joint program between the UK and Sweden on Type 83 be? Be quite nice, but I'd say it would have to be more countries than those for it to be working. Voxan, why hasn't defence become a national scandal? In other nations, they'd have current retired politicians dragged out to answer questions, yet we don't do that. Because the British don't really do that at the moment. We haven't reached that level. We haven't had... The thing is, we've got problems going on. Everyone sees this problem, but there's been no shock moment where people going, oh, frigate! We haven't lost the war yet, is the theory, is the thing going on. We haven't had a major military disaster. It's kind of like... So far, everything's been okay. And that's what they're getting away with. And that's the thing that worries me. I would prefer to sort things out now, and increase funding and support things as they are now, I have a feeling we were. I have a feeling, as much as I prefer it, we didn't. We won't learn lessons until they're learnt in blood. Lions, nothing scared of shipless yet. Nope. So what was our American electrician friend's thoughts about the naval diplomacy body wash? I'm not going. Nice to have already been there. He's been. She keeps suggesting she's going to procure it for me. It's scaring me. It's worrying me. Ronan's currently threatening me with this body wash. I don't want that. Oh. Anyway, sort of like the scandal, the late 50-81, 85-81, the scandal only broke when the Iran war happened. Yeah. That is the point. That is the point. That's better. Joe Fredericks, Indonesian Navy have decided to combine the role of presidential yacht and corvette. They're still figuring out how to fit in VLS cells on it. What's your opinion on this ingenious idea? The Thai Navy combined the role of royal yacht and aircraft carrier at one point. That wasn't a great idea either. Look, you do what you do to try and get the ships you need, but I would argue that if you are going for if you're going for something like a presidential yacht, if you're going for something which is a royal yacht or diplomatic asset, go for something which is a diplomatic asset. And make it as strong as possible. And in terms of diplomatic asset. And then build a warship to cover it. But that being said, that's all questions gone through. So I'm going to do this and this. I'm going to say thank you very much everyone for being here. I'm going to say I hope you did like, share and subscribe to the video, because it helps the channel grow, and thank you for supporting the channel. I'm going to be on Discord in a bit, I'm going to go check out exactly why my sister was hunting the tow rope, and if I think it's necessary, the tow rope will appear. If it's, oh good lord, not at this time of night, then the tow rope won't appear till tomorrow morning, and then I'll do it tomorrow. Can you put self-defense assets on such a thing such as a royal yacht? That would probably be sensible. But thank you for this. Thank you for being here. I hope you've enjoyed the video. I hope you're looking forward to next week's video, because next week's video is the Royal Navy on Tuesday. Next Tuesday video is the Royal Navy in the run to World War I, and how exactly they were winding up the French whilst also competing with the Germans. It's one of those scenarios where they are basically playing complete pinata with their European counterparts. And I hope you enjoyed today's video, and I hope you like the videos we can do in the future. I know that there are some videos which are getting a little bit more war studies, and some videos which are still sticking to pure history. This is a bit of a naval history / war studies channel. And this is probably more of a war studies video than just a naval history one. But I hope you enjoyed it. The whole thing about war studies, which I studied and did my PhD in the King's College London, is that you use history, and you'll find this if you go follow those links down below, especially Lesser Patalano's ones. Use history to try and prepare for the future. You can't predict the future, but you can prepare for the future using history as a guide. And learning and not forgetting the lessons of history, so you don't have to keep relearning them, because honestly, a lot of lessons of history are very costly, not just in terms of treasure, but in terms of blood. And that's the thing about naval diplomacy. If it's done right, if you do naval diplomacy right and conflict management right, then with a little bit of luck, you might never have to fight a war. And that's the thing. If you do it right. If you're not able to do it, or you don't do it well, or don't do it and don't invest in it, you're going to make wars more likely. Because wars become more likely when people talk less. Because if you think about it, it happens in your own lifetimes, in your own lives. It's often violence happens when there's failures to communicate. Sometimes there are complete random acts of violence. You'll walk into a situation where someone is robbing somewhere or something like that. That is something you wander into, you can't really predict coming. But if you think about it, nations aren't like that because they mostly see each other. They know each other. They're an ongoing discussion, ongoing relationship. So it's more, when we're talking about violence between nations, it is more like violence between colleagues in a workplace. Study history or become history. Yeah, Mark Harness. Oh, Dominic Buckley. Yeah, I've seen that. Nicest way. Don't take this the wrong way about the American captains, but they are often not. If that I have watched them trying to keep up with a Scotsman drinking whiskey. It was not good for them. It was not good. They were in no way prepared for European quantities of alcohol that can be consumed. Take care, everyone. Thank you very much for watching, and hope you enjoyed. Toodles. And let's see what I can find for the Twitch people to go to. Can I find anyone who's interesting and wandering around on Twitch? Are any of my fellow ship shapers wandering around on Twitch? Are there anyone wandering around on Twitch? For me to raid into. Sorry, no one today, so I will wish you all good luck and hope you find somewhere nice. Take care, everyone, and someday I'll figure out raiding on YouTube. Thank you very much, everyone. Take care. I know someone has sent me, I think Knight sent me links to videos which I can do raiding on YouTube, and I still haven't yet quite managed to figure it out. But thank you, everyone, and someday I'll figure it out. Thank you all. Take care.